Good morning and welcome to the June 18th Landmarks Preservation Commission public hearing and public meeting. We'll begin this morning by taking attendance, and I'll ask our General Counsel, Mark Silverman, to call the roll.
Chair Carroll. Chair Carroll.
Here.
Vice Chair Bland. Commissioner Chapin.
Here.
Commissioner Chen.
Here.
Commissioner Chu.
Here.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
Here.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Here.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Here.
Commissioner Lutfi. Commissioner Master.
All right. Good morning again and welcome to our public hearing and public meeting of June 18th. We are meeting today in person in our public hearing room on the 9th floor of 1 Center Street. This meeting is also being held via Zoom for anyone who would like to participate remotely, and it is being live streamed on our YouTube channel should anyone want to just watch the proceedings. We have a full agenda today. We'll be beginning with our research department's agendas. We have 3 public meeting items. One is a new proposal for designation, and 2 are other proposals for designation for which we've already held a hearing. Then we will then move to our preservation department public meeting agenda, where we will consider the vote on the proposed rules for bus shelters, and we will also review an application that has already had a public hearing and is back today with changes in response to our comments at the public hearing. And then we will move to our preservation department public hearing agenda to review new applications for work on designated properties. And with that, I will turn it over to our Director of Research, Kate Lemos-McHale.
Thank you, Sarah. Item number 1 this morning is LP 2658, the Jacob Day Residence at 50 West 13th Street, Manhattan, Block 576, Lot 15. Item proposed for the Commission's calendar is a 3-story Greek Revival style row house built in 1845, which from 1859 to 1884 was the home and business of the prominent African-American abolitionist and businessman Jacob Day. Presenting is Terry Noonan.
Good morning. I'm Teresa Noonan, and in honor of the national holiday of Juneteenth, which is tomorrow, I am proud to present for your consideration the Jacob Day Residence. Okay. It's not working. Okay, great. Sorry for the interruption. Technical difficulties. The former Jacob Day Residence is a rare surviving 3-story Greek Revival style brick row house built in 1845 for William B. Fash. Jacob Day, a prominent African-American caterer and property owner, purchased the house in circa 1859 and used it as his place of residence and business until his death in 1884. His heirs continued to own the building until 1896. Day was an advocate for abolition of slavery prior to the Civil War, and later for voting rights and economic opportunities for African Americans in the second half of the 19th century. The Jacob Day Residence at 50 West 13th Street is a rare extant site that is historically and culturally significant, in particular for its connection to New York City's pre-Civil War and post-Reconstruction African American history. The building is located on West 13th Street between 5th and 6th Avenues, just north of the Greenwich Village Historic District. The proposed landmark site is the tax lot. LPC has received requests for evaluation for the property from the Village Preservation, along with research on Jacob Day and other occupants of the building. Our staff has also done extensive research into this building, Jacob Day himself, and Black history in Lower Manhattan in the mid-19th century, and determined that this property merits consideration for designation as a rare extant property associated with this history. Okay. Jacob Day was a significant figure as both an abolitionist and a prominent businessman before the Civil War. Abolitionism was a dangerous activity for Black individuals, but despite the risks, Day was a member of the National Anti-Slavery Society and a contemporary of other distinguished abolitionists of the day, and a member of Abyssinian Baptist Church at 166 Waverly Place, a strong supporter of abolition and African-American civil rights that was targeted during the 1863 draft riots. Day was a successful caterer when this was one of the few profitable business opportunities that Black men could pursue. He was a member of the Freedmen's Bank, founded after the Civil War, as a means of improving the economic prospects of African Americans, and a member of the Caterers Club, with other Black entrepreneurs who made names for themselves at that time. Eventually becoming affluent, property owner Jacob Day was considered part of New York City's Black elite in the 19th century, at a time when African Americans faced substantial barriers to building wealth. He began to own real estate as early as 1846 through a land grant in upstate New York given to him by the abolitionist Gerrit Smith, a fellow member of the Anti-Slavery Society. And he later owned property in Brooklyn and Long Island. At the time of his death in 1884, he was worth an estimated $200,000, equivalent of $6 million today. There are very few surviving sites in Manhattan, associated with the pre-Civil War abolitionist movement. Two of LPC designations with this history include 2 White Street, home of abolitionist Theodore S. Wright, a prominent Black minister and head of the Presbyterian Church, and the Lamartine Place Historic District, known for its association with noted white abolitionists Abby Hopper Gibbons and James Sloan Gibbons, who escaped with their family from this site during the 1863 riots. The Jacob Day residence strongly associated with this history, as well as the Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction era after the Civil War. Jacob Day lived at 50 West 13th Street from 1859 until 1884 and had a catering business on the ground floor. The building was built in 1845 for William Fash and appears in the 1854 Paris map on the left. At this time, there was a coal yard open to the street next to the property. The building also appears on an 1857 map on the right. Through the 1860s, the address was 64 West 13th Street. At the time, in the mid-19th century, despite the significant discrimination and harsh living conditions, Greenwich Village became home to many Black residences, businesses, schools, churches, and benevolent societies. The area around Minetta Lane and Bleecker Street, south of Washington Square, became known as Little Africa. Census records indicate that Jacob Day rented additional rooms to other African Americans. According to the Board of Education records, the prominent educator, abolitionist, and later suffragist, Sarah J. Tompkins Garnett, lived at 50 West 13th Street from 1860s to 1874. During this time, she lived in the house. Tompkins Garnett was a teacher and later in 1863 was promoted as the first Black female principal within the New York public school system at Colored School Number 4, a designated New York City landmark. The row house is a rare extant example of 19th century Greek revival style building. It retains its 19th century form, materials, and facade configuration. and also the 40-year period of association with the Jacob Day and his family. After Jacob Day and his heirs moved out of the house in 1896, the house had various owners until the 1950s. In 1959, 50 West 13th Street was renovated to create a theater in the basement, a school on the first floor, and apartments above. Among various tenants, in the middle of the 20th century, in 1968, the groundbreaking 4-member Afro-American folklore troupe had a residency at the theater, performing poetry, folklore, and works by well-known Black writers such as James Weldon Johnson, Gwendolyn Brooks, Leroy Jones, and Langston Hughes. From 1972 to 2020, the building was home to the 13th Street Repertory Company, one of New York's longest-running off-Broadway theaters, founded by Edith O'Hare. The 26-seat basement theater was home to many aspiring actors and playwrights who honed their skills at the 26-seat basement theater, including Bette Midler, Barry Manilow, Chaz Palminteri, Amy Stiller, and Richard Dreyfuss. Built more than 175 years ago and owned by Jacob Day and his family for nearly 40 years, 50 West 13th Street is an extraordinarily significant and rare extant row house associated with mid-19th century and pre-Civil War Black history. The Greek Revival style building is architecturally, historically, and culturally significant for its connection to the prominent African-American abolitionists, civil rights activists, and businessmen, an important African-American community in Greenwich Village in the 19th century. The research staff recommends the Jacob Day residence for the commissioner's calendar. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Terry. Do we have any questions for Kate or Terry?
Yeah, do
Yeah.
we know if there's any proposed plans to do any kind of work on it? It's not in such good shape.
It's not in such good shape, and frankly, as during the later years as a theater, I think there were not the funds to keep it up, and then since then, it has remained vacant, which is always concerning. We have been working and talking to the owner, and we understand that he does have plans to renovate and restore the front facade and renovate it for a new use on the inside. So we are working closely with him and hope to calendar it so that we can do that under our jurisdiction. Yep. Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner Jefferson.
Are there many pre-Civil War buildings like this?
So I'll
existing?
let Kate answer that question.
Pre-Civil War buildings like this? There are, I mean, Greenwich Village does have many streetscapes of row houses of this time period. I think this one is really interesting, kind of more on its own. It has survived that part of the neighborhood growing up around it, and this history that has been gathered about its association with this very prominent Black businessman who is also an abolitionist just helps tell that story that we do have a bit of a gap in terms of designations in the post-Reconstruction era, and also they're quite rare in terms of the a remaining abolitionist home.
Great. Other questions? Any-
Seems to be
yes,
the only
Commissioner
house
Chu.
left on the block. The rest of the buildings all around it are much larger scale buildings.
Yes, it has had apartment buildings and other, and in fact, the building next door is a hotel. So it's
Right.
had other larger buildings develop all around it. So it, unlike some of the streetscapes further to the west, yeah.
Unique.
So it's unique on
Yeah.
this particular block, but also this particular history about this prominent African-American abolitionist prosperous businessman is also a story that isn't that well represented in many of our extant landmarks. All right, so Commissioner Jefferson, would you like to make a motion to calendar it?
So move.
Thank you. And Commissioner Chu, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, well, that is officially calendared and we look forward to our public hearing, our next step in our public hearing. Thank you, Terry. We'll move to the next item.
Item number 2 this morning is LP 2682, the Frederick Douglass Memorial Park at 3201 Amboy Road in Staten Island, Block 4475, Lot 300. Item proposed for designation is a 14.88 acre cemetery designed by J. Wallace Higgins and opened in 1935. Presenting is Mary Ann Hurley.
Good morning. I am very pleased to present Frederick Douglass Memorial Park. Frederick Douglass Memorial Park is a non-sectarian cemetery at 3201 Amboy Road in Staten Island. It opened in 1935 as a place where African Americans could be assured a peaceful and dignified burial during a time when they experienced discrimination at other cemeteries. With its park-like grounds designed by J. Wallace Higgins, the historically and culturally significant Memorial Park has continued to serve the community with the same mission for over a century, for almost a century. At the public hearing May 21st, the commission received support for the proposed designation from 5 speakers, including 2 board representatives of the owner, Council Member Kamala Hanks, Chair of the Subcommittee on Landmarks, Public Sightings and Dispositions, the New York Landmarks Conservancy, and the Historic Districts Council. No one spoke in opposition. The commission also received 8 letters, including a joint letter signed by 3 council members from Staten Island, David Carr, Kamala Hanks, and Joseph Borelli. The proposed individual landmark is a 14.88 acre lot in the Oakwood Heights neighborhood of Staten Island. It is adjacent to the larger Ocean View Cemetery and late 20th century housing tracts. The main entrance is at the northeast corner at the intersection of Amboy Road and Montreal Avenue. Frederick Douglass Memorial Park was founded by Rodney Dade. He was a Harlem funeral director who experienced firsthand the inequities African Americans experienced at many cemeteries. Visiting families and funeral processions were often relegated to the side gates, and the deceased were buried in the least desirable plots. Rodney Dade wanted to provide fitting burial sites for African Americans, offering the same services and facilities to everyone. He enlisted the support of professionals who shared his vision. He partnered with Benjamin Diamond, a successful businessman, and Frederick Bunn, an attorney with nearby Ocean View Cemetery. The first board of directors included prominent Harlem citizens, fellow funeral directors, and ministers. A newspaper article noted that the first governing board consisted of, quote, public-spirited men who sensed the growing need of just such an artistic development, unquote. One of the first directors was the highly influential Adam Clayton Powell Sr., pastor of the well-known Abyssinian Baptist Church. Staten Island, with areas of undeveloped land, was an attractive location to create cemeteries. New Jersey civil engineer and landscape architect J. Wallace Higgins designed the memorial park with gently curving roadways, as shown in this 1935 drawing. From the time of its founding, the park reserved a prominent location for a monument to Frederick Douglass, close to the entrance. The new memorial park was founded to continue Frederick Douglass's vision of social justice. For centuries, burials of Africans and African Americans were either separate from the mainline cemeteries or restricted to the fringes in the least desirable locations. Labeled on the 1755 map as the Negroes' burial grounds, a significant African burial ground was located outside the city's colonial boundary. It had been forgotten and built upon for years. The area is now protected as the African Burial Ground and Commons Historic District, a 1993 New York City landmark. Citizens Union Cemetery was established for the free Black community in Weeksville, Brooklyn, by Alexander Duncan, a Black undertaker, in 1851. This Citizens Union Cemetery appears to be the first non-sectarian cemetery established by and for African Americans in New York City. Frederick Douglass Memorial Park appears to be the second and today the only extant one in New York City. Frederick Douglass Memorial Park opened with its first burials June 10, 1935. It incorporated the latest engineering and landscape design features, such as a park-like setting with extensive watering and drainage systems. As a convenience to the neighborhood, the administrative offices were located on 125th Street in Harlem. The idea of a modern 20th century memorial park emphasizes the beauty of the countryside and inspiration of nature. There are grasslands with open vistas that contrast with stands of trees. Most of the stone markers are laid flat on the ground to highlight the overall park-like setting. Discs of stamped metal section markers are mounted on poles, and marble row markers that date from the early days of the cemetery are still located throughout the memorial park. Another characteristic of memorial parks is the installation of traditional art. The 8-foot-tall granite monument of Frederick Douglass was designed by sculptor Angus McDougall. Hortense Jones, president of the cemetery board, and Ruth Whaley, secretary of the city's Board of Estimate, unveiled the monument in a festive ceremony at the cemetery on May 28, 1961. The program included speakers, a choir from Abyssinian Baptist Church, and a special commemorative booklet. In addition to the thousands of everyday people who have been buried in the cemetery, there are several notable celebrities. The jazz singer Mamie Smith, who died in 1946, became Queen of the Blues. Regarded as a pioneer who paved the way for others during the Harlem Renaissance. Also notable is Tommy Ladner, an accomplished jazz trumpeter during the 20s and 30s. He's considered by many as second only to Louis Armstrong. Ladner performed locally in Harlem, but also toured Europe with band leaders Sam Wooding and Noble Sissle. Saul White is considered one of the founding fathers of Black baseball, a pioneer who, it's said, paved the way for Jackie Robinson. He played on white and black teams and also wrote The History of Colored Baseball in 1907. Saul White and outfielder Elias Brown, shown on the right, is also buried in the cemetery, and both were inducted into the Negro Baseball Hall of Fame. Elias Brown played with the Baccarat Giants in the 1926 Colored World Series. Lifelong educator Joanna Berry Shields was one of the founders of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority in 1908. It was the first Black sorority in the country. A graduate of Howard University, she taught high school in the Bronx, and she was active in many civic and community organizations, and also served on the Mayor's Committee on Human Rights and Consumer Protection. The cemetery office building is located along the north edge of the property. The gable end section to the right was built between 1947 and 1955. The tower and two-story section, originally for a small chapel and a caretaker's apartment, was completed in 1961. James Whitford Jr., a prolific Staten Island architect, designed the addition. Despite recent facade alterations to the office building and a replacement front entrance gate, the Memorial Park retains its original acreage and overall design. And in conclusion, the Frederick Douglass Memorial Park on Staten Island is a historically significant cemetery established for and by African Americans. Since 1935, it has provided a park-like resting place and is rich with the history of African American communities. The cemetery celebrates and memorializes Black heritage through the lives of everyday people who were afforded the respect they deserved. Due to its rich cultural and social history, the research department recommends that the commission votes to designate Frederick Douglass Memorial Park as an individual landmark. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Commissioners, any questions or thoughts on this one? Yes, Commissioner Jefferson.
Yeah, I had a thought last night. I was thinking about these designations, these cultural landscape designations. I was thinking about this last night. Can you hear me now? That these cultural landmarks, these cultural landscapes designation, they tell a story. They're fairy tales, really. These cultural landmarks, they're lost in shadows and are discovered. They have good fairies and they had bad fairies. They all tell of redemptive stories of the urban cultural history of our time. Yeah,
That's
so-
beautiful. Thank you very much. Other thoughts? Other comments? Well, I just want to add to that. And I think, this is a really exciting and moving designation. And, what struck me, and we did a tour with some board members, including the president of the board, who's here today, and to walk around this park-like setting and to hear the stories of the people buried there was incredibly moving. And yes, it was really interesting that there were notable people, but I think the thing that struck me is that there were so many ordinary people that have these stories that are really that just sort of about the African American experience, but it's really our collective heritage and our collective history. And I commend the board of the cemetery for treating them in such a dignified way and being so committed to this cemetery. And I hope that a designation today would continue to honor the memories of everyone buried there and this collective history. Yes, Commissioner Goldblum.
Yeah, the testimony that we had a few weeks ago was really moving. And these are important places for people, for communities, and it certainly merits designation.
Great. Thank you. Any other hands? Okay. Commissioner Chen, would you make the motion?
I'll be delighted to. I move that the Landmarks Preservation Commission designate Frederick Douglass Memorial Park, 3201 Amboy Road, Borough of Staten Island, as a New York City landmark because of its special character and special historical and aesthetic interest and value as part of the development, heritage, and cultural characteristics of the city, state, and nation, and as set forth in the designation report for LP 2682 dated June 18, 2024. I also move that the Borough of Staten Island tax map block 4475, lot 300 be designated as its landmark site as described in the designation report and illustrated in the attachment.
Great. Thank you. And Commissioner Jefferson, would you second that motion?
So second.
Thank you. Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Chu,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
With 8 in favor and none opposed, the motion passed.
All right. That is officially designated. Thank you all, and thanks to Marianne and Kate and Margaret in our research department. And we'll move to the next item.
Item 3 this morning is LP 2680, the Brooklyn Edison Building at 345 Adams Street, Brooklyn, AKA 372 to 392 Pearl Street, 11 to 17 Willoughby Street, Brooklyn, Block 140, Lot 7503. Item proposed for designation is a Renaissance Revival style commercial building designed by Mackenzie, Voorhees, and Gemelin and built in 1922 to 26 for the Brooklyn Edison Company. And presenting this morning for our staff person, Bilge Kosa, is Margaret Herman. Thank you.
Good morning. The Brooklyn Edison Building is a distinguished Renaissance Revival style office building designed by Mackenzie, Voorhees, and Gemelin for the Brooklyn Edison Company and built between 1922 and 1926. Highly visible from Adams Street, Columbus Park, and Fulton Streets, the monumental building is a notable landmark in the civic and commercial center of Brooklyn. At the public hearing on June 4th, 2024, 3 people testified, including representatives of the Downtown Brooklyn Association and Historic District Council who spoke in favor of designation. The owner of the commercial condo did not oppose the designation, but emphasized their concerns about flexibility and making changes necessary to the commercial storefronts. The commission also received 2 letters in support of the designation, including from District 33 Council member Lincoln Ressler and a representative of the Brooklyn Heights Association. The Brooklyn Edison Building is located at 345 Adams Street on the corner of Willoughby, Pearl, and Adams Street. Originally headquartered at 360 Pearl Street in downtown Brooklyn, the Edison Electric Illuminating Company of Brooklyn was established in 1889 to provide electricity to the homes and businesses of Brooklyn. The company met the demands of customers not only by providing new infrastructure, but also numerous patented designs that introduced the latest technologies to the market. In 1919, the Brooklyn Edison Company was formally recognized after a merger and continued to be the leader in the city's utility scene. By the 1920s, as electric power was brought within the reach of the average citizen, the use of residential and commercial electrical devices and appliances expanded. After the completion of subway lines from Manhattan, growth in residential development increased the demand for additional electricity capacity in Brooklyn. To answer this demand, the Brooklyn Edison Company purchased the adjacent lot to construct a new, larger building as its headquarters and commissioned Mackenzie, Voorhees, and Gemelin to design it. The practice of Mackenzie, Voorhees, and Gemelin was largely active from 1910 through 1925. After Mackenzie's death in 1926, the firm continued as Voorhees, Gemelin, and Walker until 1938. The firm was renowned for its office buildings designed for leading infrastructure firms, including the American Telephone and Telegraph Company and the New York Telephone Company. In its various iterations in the 1920s, it designed numerous notable office and commercial buildings throughout New York City, including the Brooklyn Municipal Building in the Borough Hall Skyscraper Historic District, the Long Island headquarters of the New York Telephone Company and the Barclay Vasey buildings with Ralph Walker, and the long distance building of the American Telephone and Telegraph Company with Cyrus L.W. Eidlitz, all designated individual landmarks. Located on the prominent corner of Willoughby and Pearl Streets, the Brooklyn Edison Building was designed and constructed in 2 phases. The first phase took place in 1922 to 1923, and the building expanded northwards in 1926, doubling its footprint. The expansion was also designed by Mackenzie, Voorhees, and Gemelin. After its construction, the Brooklyn Edison Building became a notable addition to the financial and commercial center of Brooklyn. Designed in the Renaissance Revival style, the building features a tripartite configuration with a rusticated stone base, brick and stone middle section, and a double setback crown, responding to the requirements of the 1916 zoning law. It's decorated with Renaissance Revival style elements, particularly focused at the street level and at its roofline, including double height arch windows with multi-light transoms and embellished ironwork, shields, festoon motifs, and coins, as well as intricately detailed terracotta cornices. The building program included office spaces, showrooms, the Edison shop, a lunchroom, and an auditorium that played a pivotal role in Brooklyn's social scene. The building regularly hosted conferences, exhibitions, fashion shows, charity fundraisers, and philanthropic meetings between the 1920s and 1950s. Originally located on the southeast corner of the block, the primary facades of the building face Pearl and Willoughby Streets. However, during the construction of the Brooklyn Civic Center and the expansion of Adams Street in the 1950s, the western half of the block was removed and the urban setting changed. Following demolition of the adjacent buildings, the ground floors of Brooklyn Edison Building's west facade became exposed. The building was adapted to the changing streetscape by moving its main entrance to Adams Street in the mid-1960s. In 2009, commercial owners Must Development LLC created retail spaces with new storefronts along Adams Street and interpreted and replicated historic features on Willoughby and Pearl Street with modern materials. The new storefronts activated the street frontage facing the Civic Center and helped tie the lower floors into their urban surroundings. Despite the change to the city grid around it and changes on the lower stories of the west facade, the building retains its historic form and character. Highly visible from many vantage points, its monumentality and prominent massing incorporating highly intact Renaissance Revival style elements is further emphasized after the change in the urban fabric of downtown Brooklyn. Recently, a comprehensive restoration of the building facades was completed under the ownership of the New York City Department of Citywide Administrative Services. The building continues to serve as an office building with commercial activities on its first and second floors. The Brooklyn Edison Company building was central to the borough's electrification and stands as a testament to the transformative impact of technological advancements in electricity production on Brooklyn's urban development. The building also played an important role as a vibrant hub for social and cultural activities in Brooklyn, drawing the community together through a variety of public events organized in it. Today, highly visible from Adams Street, Columbus Park, and Fulton Streets, the architecturally and historically significant building continues to provide a monumental backdrop to Brooklyn's Civic Center, with elaborate Renaissance Revival style decoration and setback massing that recall the time of its construction. Designed by one of the most prominent architectural firms in the city, the building became a hallmark in downtown Brooklyn's evolving urban setting. The research department recommends its designation as an individual landmark. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. All right, any questions on this one or thoughts? Okay. I mean, this one again is, as you walk into downtown Brooklyn and you see the new life that's happening there, this building continues to play an important part of that evolving character and nature. And it is, architecturally significant by virtue of its style, its size, and its type, and its architects, but it really does also provide sort of an anchor as well as a gateway to this new evolving neighborhood. So I would urge that we move forward. Commissioner Chu, would you be willing to make a motion for this one?
Yes. I move that the Landmarks Preservation Commission designate Brooklyn Edison Building, 345 Adams Street, also known as 372 to 392 Pearl Street, 1117 Willoughby Street, Borough of Brooklyn, as a New York City landmark because of its special character and his special historical and aesthetic interest and value as part of the development, heritage, and cultural characteristics of the city, state, and nation, as set forth in the designation report for LP 2680 dated June 18, 2024. I also move that the Borough of Brooklyn tax map Block 140, Lot 7503, formerly Lot 123, be designated as its landmark site, as described in the designation report and illustrated in the attached map.
Thank you. Commissioner Lutfi, would you second that motion? Second. Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin, Commissioner Chapin, you're muted.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Chu,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi. With 8 in favor, none opposed, the motion passes.
All right, that is our next newest landmark. Thank you all, and thank you to the research team for your great work as always.
Right, we're now going to move to our Preservation Department agenda, starting with public meeting item number 1. This is a public meeting on proposed rules pursuant to the City Administrative Procedures Act. Proposed amendments to Chapter 2 of Title 63 of the Rules of the City of New York, consisting of amendments to existing rules, including amendments relating to the installation of bus shelters. This was last presented at the public hearing of May 14th, 2024. Next slide, please. At the public hearing of May 14th, 2024, LPC and DOT staff presented information and proposed rules for regulating bus shelters, and the commission received public comment on the proposed rule. Since then, staff has been carefully reviewing the comments and concerns raised by the public, and we're going to walk through our responses today. Next slide. First, a quick reminder of our proposed approach to regulating bus shelters. Essentially, we propose to allow shelters in historic districts where the design is the PDC approved design and the shelter is at an official MTA identified bus stop and meets DOT requirements without requiring a permit from LPC. LPC has not reviewed placement and installation of shelters to date, and there are approximately 100 shelters already located within historic districts. LPC was involved in the discussions surrounding the initial bus shelter design, and PDC will continue to be involved in the future if there's ever a proposal to change the design. LPC will require a permit if the shelter is proposed in an area of historic paving, and the proposed rule will require that historic paving like bluestone or granite be documented. And if the shelter is relocated or removed in the future, that matching paving be reinstalled. Mark Silberman, our general counsel, will now address the first parts of our response to testimony.
Thank you, Corey. The commission heard a variety of testimony at the public hearing. Some testimony was supportive, noting the importance of bus shelters as critical transportation infrastructure that offers a wider segment of the city's population access to public transit and protection from the elephants. Particularly noting that these residents live throughout the city and the ability to place bus shelters both in and out of historic districts so they're available to everyone is an equity issue. DOT testified that having bus shelters is a fairly recent development and that advertising has been part of the bus shelter franchise since the beginning of the 1970s. Some commenters had a variety of concerns, and I want to walk through them with you and give you the staff's responses. First, there was a number of comments that somehow the proposed rule, by not requiring LPC review and approval of every installation, was an abrogation or elimination of LPC jurisdiction. This is not the case. Proposing a rule does not abrogate or remove LPC's authority, but rather is an example of exercising that authority. If the proposed rule is approved, the LPC would not be giving up jurisdiction, but rather finding that the design and siting criteria result in bus shelters having no effect on the significant exterior features of the buildings in the historic district. By not requiring LPC review, LPC is recognizing that the design and siting criteria regulated and policed by DOT are adequate. Nor is this an improper delegation of LPC's authority to PDC. Under the charter, PDC is responsible for approving street furniture that is to be used citywide. LPC has the right to say that this street furniture can or cannot be placed in areas under our jurisdiction. This rulemaking is an exercise in that authority that would represent a decision that the PDC approved design, which LPC was involved in commenting on, is appropriate or otherwise has no effect. If the design is changed in the future, LPC can revisit this rule. Secondly, there was a bunch of comments about that the public realm structures are important to the preservation of historic districts, and that somehow by not reviewing everything, we were denigrating the importance of public structures. Staff agrees street furniture is important. We have a number of street furniture rules, and the bus shelter rule is consistent with rules previously adopted for public pay telephones and Link NYC kiosks, both of which allowed advertising, by the way. LPC is not giving up jurisdiction on review of street furniture in general if it adopts this rule. Okay. LPC currently has rules for a variety of street furniture, as I just said, and including also public sidewalk paving, street trees, and bioswales. This rule doesn't change that. This rule is not relevant to how LPC will review other types of street furniture in the future. So it stands alone for what it is, an application for this particular type of structure. Lastly, there were some comments that the rule eliminates public engagement. Again, this CAPA is a public process. It is public engagement, and asks and seeks engagement by the public. All rules that we've adopted, and we have quite a variety of rules, result in applications not coming to the commission for a public hearing. The landmarks law anticipates and authorizes rulemaking. Rules make the process transparent so property owners know what they can do and also don't burden the commission's calendar with applications and work that we have previously found appropriate. It also tells the public what can happen as of right. So sort of in sum, the process we are in is really no different than a typical C of A application. It's a public process. In essence, we have an application for a new structure in a historic district that is part of the city's transportation infrastructure. The applicant is asking it be allowed only at official bus stops, and we're citing and clearance criteria are satisfied. Since there is no historic precedent, the applicant is proposing a minimalist, modern, and transparent structure that does not pretend to be historic, and according to the applicant, does not call attention to itself or detract from historic streetscapes. Coincidentally, you have the advantage of being able to see these shelters and these structures in situ throughout the city. So you already can rely on your own experience instead of renderings or other types of projections. To repeat, if you vote to approve the rule, you will be making a finding the bus shelter design is appropriate and has no effect on significant exterior architectural features. With that, let me turn it over to Corey to respond to the specific design-related comments.
Thanks. And next slide one more time, please. Thank you. Before covering design-related responses, I did want to touch a little bit on historic paving again. Several commenters supported staff's proposal to require permits for shelters that would impact historic paving, but noted that they would like to see also a requirement that removed paving be salvaged and stored for future reinstallation. We believe this presents a logistical issue in terms of finding and maintaining a storage space and oversight of it. And the current LPC rule related to historic paving at sidewalks already covers permitted repairs to stone paving and allows in-kind replacement. And we found that new matching materials are generally available. In terms of public comments on the design and visual impacts of the shelters, there were a series of comments stating that bus shelters in general were inappropriate in historic districts. Commenters found that the shelters are too large and block storefronts, and that some districts warranted individualized designs that would better complement the area's character. LPC staff disagrees. The current shelter design is modern, minimalist, and transparent and allows views through the shelters to the buildings beyond. As a result, staff concluded that the shelters do not and will not detract from the streetscape or the significant features of the building they're installed in front of. Furthermore, there is no historical prototype for bus shelters in any district, and designing individualized shelters, even for select historic districts, isn't feasible and would likely result in no bus shelters being installed within these historic areas. We find it makes sense that transportation infrastructure has a consistent design language and that bus shelters should be readily identifiable no matter the location, as has consistently been the practice in New York City. A subset of these commenters specifically stated that shelters were most incongruous with the Upper East Side and Madison Avenue historic districts and streets. Again, LPC staff disagrees. The commission has always regulated Madison Avenue more flexibly to keep up with the evolving demands of current high-end retailers and has a separate master plan document for storefronts that allows options for very modern installations where there is no existing historic fabric. And as a result, the streetscape is a blend of contemporary and historic storefronts. The character of the open and glassy contemporary bus shelter design is particularly in line with LPC's approach to storefront infill in this area. Finally, some comments related to how the moving video screen advertising would detract from there were some comments that mentioned that moving video screen advertisements would detract from the streetscape in historic districts. LPC staff disagrees with this comment. First, city bus shelters have consistently featured advertising commensurate with technology available at the time. As technology has evolved, so have the ad panels. This is a continuation of that, and as DOT noted at the hearing, this advertising funds the installation and maintenance of these bus shelters. Second, signage on shelters is set away from and oriented perpendicular to buildings and exists within a busy streetscape of cars, trucks, buses, and other street furniture. The back wall of the shelters is always transparent and people can see through these modern elements to the buildings beyond. And pedestrians will still have unobstructed views of storefronts from the sidewalk between the shelter and the building. This is very different from signage attached to a building, which is usually oriented parallel to it and physically attached to the building. Storefront signage is integral to the building itself and seen in context with the building from all viewpoints. Since multiple commenters also brought up the impact of digital advertising specifically along Madison Avenue, I wanted to reiterate that we do not find that the video screen will detract from this streetscape either. This is partially due to the reasons I just reviewed, but also because the shelters are designed to fit within the Madison Avenue sidewalks specifically have a skinnier advertising panel that will be the smallest of any of the bus shelters in the city. Also, the zoning regulations for signage on buildings, including those that do not allow illuminated signage on buildings along Madison Avenue, do not apply to elements within the public right-of-way, such as a bus shelter. Zoning and LPC rules allow signage as of right at every storefront on a street. So if every store opted for illuminated or digital signage, there is an issue of cumulative impact to the streetscape. This is not a concern with bus shelters, which are spaced much further apart and limited to how many are located per block. Next slide, please. If voted on today, proposed rule changes will be published in City Record. The rules will become effective 30 days after the publication. With that, Mark and I are happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Corey and Mark. Any questions for Corey or Mark on the proposed rule? Yes, Commissioner Chu.
How are they powered? Solar powered or
No, they're actually, they connect
they're
to the,
connected?
yeah,
Connections made on the city lines on the street side.
right.
Yeah, Commissioner Ginsburg.
I just want to reiterate that bus shelters are an important public amenity, and the minimalist design that is largely glass seems to me very appropriate, and that consistency both has cost advantages, but also allows for people to easily identify the shelters. And so I think this is totally appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chen.
Just, I want to add on the Commissioner Ginsburg and I were talking earlier about, this hot streak that's coming, and pity the tens of thousands of bus riders that are waiting in downtown Flushing, and much of them don't have bus shelters. And quoting a prediction that last summer, the hot summer that we had is the coolest summer to come in years to come. So I think it's long overdue.
Yeah, thank you very much. Any other thoughts? All right. And I think I appreciate the support, and I'm going to go ahead and make a motion. And I support the proposed rule for the siting of bus stops in areas under LPC jurisdiction. In this case, we are all very familiar with these bus stops and how they appear in the streetscape, since they've been installed throughout the city since approximately 2006. And I believe that their simplicity and transparency make them a modest but appropriate presence in the streetscape. And as shown in the record, there is no historic precedent for a bus shelter. They are contemporary transportation infrastructure that began to be widely installed in the 1970s, and the proposed design with what we typically is in line with what we typically approve in the case of a new structure in a historic district. In other words, something of our time, something that cannot be confused for something historic, that it is minimalist, transparent, and doesn't call attention to itself. And I further think that the advertising panel on the side, which is and has been the city's method for paying for this type of infrastructure since the 1970s, does not call undue attention or detract from the streetscapes. Bus shelters are set perpendicular to and away from the buildings, and they're also spread out. So as we heard, there is no cumulative impact. And as a general matter, I believe that historic districts should be served by the city's transportation system, and that bus riders should have shelter and they should be accessible. And this is a matter of equity, I think, for this city. And I also think it makes sense for there to be one design for this type of structure, which clearly communicates to the public that this is a bus stop. So I move that we adopt these rules as presented. And Commissioner Ginsburg, would you second that motion?
Second.
Thank you. Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Chu,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi. With 8 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
So as we've heard this, in 30 days, these rules will become
30
effective.
days after being published in city records.
30
that will
days
happen, by the end of the week.
By the end of the week, they will be published in City Record and they will go into effect 30 days later. All right, and we'll move to our next public meeting item.
Second public meeting item is LPC 24-05668. An application for certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 1389, Lot 127, 41 East 74th Street in the Upper East Side Historic District. This is a row house built in 1879 and altered with classical details by Gurdon S. Parker in 1941. The application is to alter and redesign the facade, install a stoop, and construct rooftop and rear yard additions. This was last presented at the public hearing of May 7th, 2024, and no action was taken at that time. Looks like we're having a bit of a technical difficulty, so hopefully that will be corrected shortly, and then we'll turn it over to the applicant to make the presentation after we open the proceedings.
Okay, all right. Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Ginsburg, would you second that
Second.
motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, as soon as the presentation is up, the applicant may present.
I'm on my hotspot. Yeah.
Okay, we should be okay. All right, I think we have the presentation up. Sorry for the delay, everyone. We'll turn it back to Robert Bianco to begin public meeting item number 2
Okay.
presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners and Chair Carroll. Robert Bianco with PKSB Architects. We are returning today with revisions to our proposal at 41 East 74th Street. As originally presented, the application included new face brick, stone cladding, and window replacements at the street facade, realignment of the lower level floors to provide an accessible entrance at grade, and a new stoop. The scope also included roof bulkheads and rear yard additions. We were asked to revisit the proportions and details of the stoop and to look more closely at how the stoop interacts with the raising of the floor levels and the proportions of the windows. We were also asked to consider a slight modification at the rear by retaining the top floor in the existing plane. So starting with the front facade, the image on the left is the design proposed at the public hearing on May 7th. And the image on the right is our revised proposal. We have addressed the overall proportion of the stoop by lowering the sill of the parlor level entry door. There will now be a small sunken vestibule upon entering the parlor level and 2 steps up at the interior. So this reduces the overall height and presence of the stoop above the sidewalk. And it also allowed us to introduce a glass transom above the parlor level entrance door. And this gives a more elongated appearance, more in line with the proportions that are typical for this building typology at the parlor level. In terms of architectural detailing at the stoop, we have introduced recessed arched niches at the front and side walls of the stoop, additional joint lines, projecting nosings at the stair treads and stair landing, and a more ornate metal railing with heftier proportions in lieu of the more delicate railing originally proposed. I think for the facade design, there was general consensus last time that a hybrid stylistic approach could be appropriate here, given this particular streetscape and its eclectic nature. But there were some suggestions made for minor tweaks to help unify the facade and the stoop. So we made those slight adjustments to bring the overall style more in the direction of a neoclassical interpretation. The window sill and lintel details have been altered slightly as you go up the facade. A stone band was introduced at the upper story sills and a more simplified lintel at the top. We've also modified the window configuration from 1/1 to 4/4 multi-light windows. And just a reminder on the historic background of this building, this was originally one of a row of 5 townhomes originally designed as identical, all with stoops, and they've all been altered in varying architectural styles. And you can see here the full block elevation with the mix of architectural styles on this block, our building in the center at the top, previously proposed at the May 7th hearing, and on the bottom, the revised proposal. Existing conditions, this building was altered in 1940, and the designation report characterizes this alteration as having no significant architectural features except compatible height. And we have revisited our precedent studies to include some neoclassical examples of similarly scaled buildings in the district. And this is in direct response to a comment that did come up in the public testimony from the Friends of the Upper East Side, who suggested that our cornice and base potentially be a darker color, a brownstone color, or a material with a darker color. And at the time, our style was skewed a bit more toward the neo-Grec, so that was a very appropriate comment. But in this revision, we are taking more direct inspiration from neoclassical examples in the district, and these are some buildings that use a similar material palette, an orangey red brick, lighter colored stone at the cornices, and window surrounds, and multi-light windows. And there is plenty of historic precedent of buildings being altered in this district in very different architectural styles over time, as well as existing and historic precedents for L-shaped stoops in the district, including on our block, Existing building section, the building is currently accessed by stepping down about 3 feet below sidewalk level, and the parlor level is approximately 7 feet above the sidewalk. This proposal realigns the lower floors to provide an accessible entrance at grade. As previously presented at the public hearing, the parlor level was about 10'4" above sidewalk level, putting the door sill in line with the parlor level, and the revised proposal lowers that by about 1'2" and relocates 2 of the steps to the interior. So this is how we've reduced the overall scale of the stoop. And also to note, we have pushed back the top floor of the rear addition to align with, to be in its existing plane. And short sections showing existing, previously proposed. This is a section through the rear addition and revised proposal with that top floor facade remaining. Existing block elevation, previously proposed. And I will note previously, the second floor entrance was slightly raised above the neighbor's balconette, and in the revision, that door sill has been brought down to be more or less in line with the balconette. Proposed materials have not changed since the public hearing: brick, limestone, cornice and sill, and base, and light colored cast stone lintels and sills. Existing street view, previously proposed, and I will just point out our neighbor 2 doors down did reconstruct their stoop in around 2011. Revised design, and looking in the other direction, existing, the previously proposed, and revised. Enlarged stoop plans. Our building and our neighbor are the only 2 properties on the block that do not have stoops or areaways projecting beyond the property line, and our proposed stoop will be aligned with the neighbor's projections. An enlarged elevation at the base showing the previous design at the top, revised design at the bottom, multi-light windows introduced, a more elongated parlor level entrance, and additional detailing at the stoop walls. And in 3D, previous proposal at the top and revised proposal at the bottom. In this view, you can see an additional arched recessed niche at the side wall of the stoop. And looking in the opposite direction. Bulkhead additions were reviewed at the public hearing and determined to have no impact on street views or public views. And moving on to the rear, where our previous proposal had a full height extension at the rear, aligning with our neighbor to the east. The revised proposal maintains that top floor aligned with its existing location and with our neighbor to the west, and still the 2-story addition and 4-story addition. This is a view of the rear yard of our block. Nearly every other building on the block has had some sort of addition or alteration at the rear. We were previously proposing to bring out our entire rear facade to align, and a small 2-story addition below. And revised proposal is essentially the same. except that the top floor is retained with an additional terrace. And we can end on a comparison of existing and revised proposal.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have questions, commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Chu.
On the front facade, when you lowered the door, did you take the extra dimension to give a little more of a landing outside the door? Because it looks like the landing is still the same height as the previous on the stair turn.
Let me return to the
Yeah.
comparison, the first slide.
The door's been lowered, so you knocked out some steps and put them on the inside.
Yes, the door's been lowered.
So that leaves you with more plant dimension.
It leaves us with, I think the plan was taken up at the mid landing.
So
Yeah.
it would have dropped that landing, but it's the same. That means you gave a little more space outside the door. up
At the top landing, yes, we did.
Otherwise,
At the
you would
top
have
landing, I
stepped
think we were,
literally
yes,
into
we
the
were a
door
little,
landing. You gave it
we were a
couple
little
steps.
scrunched before, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, I think we'll move to our discussion then. So the last time we saw this, I think most commissioners accepted the approach of mixing styles, given the variety of styles on this streetscape and the history of redesigns in this particular historic district. But I think everybody focused on the stoop and agreed that the stoop needed work and that its height resulted in odd proportions on the facade. And the applicant has come back today. They've lowered the stoop. Some of the suggestions were about articulating the stoop and with more details, and they have done that, including niches and scoring lines and a heftier railing to help it fit better in the streetscape, and to have the presence of a stoop. And then I think about half of the commissioners present had asked for the top floor of the rear facade to be maintained in its existing plane, and the applicant has made that change. And so the lower floors will align with the building to the right, but the top floor will align to the building to the left. And again, this group of buildings has all had some sort of additions at the back, so it is a varied rear facade as well. So we'll begin our discussion. I think Commissioner Lutfi, the last time we saw this, you really focused on the stoop, both its height and detailing, material or color palette.
Yeah, and I'd like to say, first of all, again, we both said this. I just want to reiterate what this building looked like before this project started. Had been completely stripped of all details, and what we saw the last time was a great first step. And now the applicant has come back and really made this a much stronger project that fits a lot more amicably within the buildings around it. And I think the changes to the stoop at the very base with the scoring and the window, it's a lovely addition. And the railings are a little heavier and more distinctive. It was a little like too neutral before. It had like in every you could see it anywhere. Now it has much more character in every way. And so the windows, the 404s work better. It just works very well. And I am okay with the back as well.
Okay, great, thanks. And I do think the changes to the window surrounds and going in closer to the neo-federal and less of the neo-Grec also sort of improves the sort of reading of this building as we interpret its mix of styles. Commissioner Chu?
Yes, I would agree with Jeannie. I think that the style is a little more specific now, has more character definition. I think overall, I just appreciate, if I look at the previous to the current, that the building has a sense, a basic fundamental sense of base, middle, and top, which to me is more welcoming to the streetscape and the pedestrian experience. Lowering the proportion made a big difference. Even adding that extra dimension at the entry of the door where you have the extra steps, I think helps because it gives that entry more of a gracious, welcoming
Yeah.
feel instead of a stair ramming right into the front door. So I think all these improvements are good. The window at the bottom of the stoop, from a stylistic perspective, I would let my fellow commissioners speak to that. I do think it helps soften the experience to the sidewalk though, and lessen the impact of a solid piece at the sidewalk level. The back rear retaining the top floor, I think is a good revision. And it does in some sense recall the front facade revision too, which is being contextual and identifying the top as a special upper level. So I think the proposal is a great response to our comments and appropriate.
All right, great. Thank you. Commissioner Jefferson.
I agree with most of the comments. I personally think that the entry is a bit dominant for my taste. It's very heavy compared to the first one. It draws a lot of attention to itself, but I can accept it. The roof addition, I think it's fine. It works very well. And the rear yard addition also. So I think it's appropriate.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Goldblum.
Agreed. The only thing I would add is I think that the applicant should work with the staff on the detailing of the masonry window surrounds and door headers. I think the heaviness that Everardo was talking about comes in some measure from the kind of, the Victorian period, neo-Greek and all. That was kind of the thing, was the heavy top. The top heavy look was part of the style, and the reaction to it in the neo-federal was to take that away and make it very light and very flat and very thin. And this is kind of, having its cake and eating it too a little, which is okay. It is an honest, upfront mishmash. So I think that's okay. It just shouldn't wind up looking like an under-detailed mishmash. It should be elegant and delicate.
Okay, thank you. We go back to Commissioner Chapin.
Yes, I think that the changes to make it move closer to the neo-Greek have been very good. I think the stoop changes, I can approve all of those. The changes to the door and the window surrounds, I think, are an improvement, including that sort of cornice at the third floor and the banding at the fourth floor. I think all of it really makes a nice presentation for the building, those particular details. And I think the back is appropriate as well.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Ginsburg.
So first, I think all the massing changes, the additions are fine. I think the stoop is an improvement. However, I want to be clear, so I'm going to be blunt, and I think I'm in the minority. The existing facade has been there for 85 years. It is history, and I don't think it needs to be changed. But if it were changed, you have a nice elevation of what the building originally looked like, but you're not changing it, saying we want to restore what was originally there. You're doing what I'd call Disneyland. We'd like this, so we'll make this. There's some of this in the neighborhood. So I can't accept that front facade as is. I think everything else would be fine.
Great, thank you. And I think you expressed those comments last time as well, and appreciate that. And I think, but again, in this particular district where there's this history of redesign, I think many of us can find the hybrid appropriate, but completely appreciate your point. Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, I tend to agree with the majority of the commissioners. Obviously, I hear what Commissioner Ginsburg is saying, but I think I'm just looking to the east of this building, to the right-hand side, and the last of the remaining five, that whatever you can take in. And I appreciate the effort. I think the multi-light window and all of that, I think is still, I can find it appropriate.
Okay, all right. So I think we can make a motion to support this, but we'll ask them to continue to work with the staff on refining the details. Okay.
In the matter of docket 24-05668, 41 East 74th Street, Upper East Side Historic District. A row house built in 1879 and altered with classical details by Gurdon S. Parker in 1941. The application is to alter and redesign the facade, install a stoop, and construct rooftop and rear yard additions. I note that the original Queen Anne style facade was altered in 1941, including the removal of facade details and the stoop and parlor floor entrance, and the creation of a new basement level entrance. I recommend approval, finding that the building had been stripped of its original ornament and was highly altered prior to the designation of the historic district. Therefore, the proposed work will not eliminate any significant architectural features. That the proposed work is in keeping with the long historic tradition within the Upper East Side Historic District of altering or replacing earlier facades with new facades. That the installation of the proposed stoop and parlor floor entrance will return this original missing feature to the building, which still exists at other houses on the block, and will recall the organization of the facade of this and other buildings in the row as originally conceived. That the overall composition and hierarchy of the proposed facade, featuring a defined base with stoop, midsection with a regular fenestration pattern, and a decorative cornice on top, will retain a sense of continuity within the streetscape. That the proposed materials and details of the front facade, including the red brick cladding, cast stone trim at the basement stoop, window surrounds and cornice, and multi-light double hung windows, will evoke the varied historic styles of row houses in this historic district. That the cumulative effect of the added volume of the proposed rooftop and rear yard additions will not overwhelm the building or the surrounding buildings in the block. That the proposed stucco-clad rooftop addition will be simply designed and set back from the front and rear facades and will not be visible from any public thoroughfare. That the original plane and fenestration pattern of the upper floor of the rear facade will remain intact, thereby preserving the relationship between this building and adjacent buildings in the row. That the proposed rear addition will not project into the rear yard beyond the adjacent building or the majority of other rear yard extensions on the block, and therefore will not further diminish the central green space or compromise a unified row. That the design and materiality of the rear addition, featuring punched windows and brick cladding with metal guardrails and cast stone sill and lintels, will be in keeping with the scale and character of rear facades within the block. That the proposed excavation to extend the cellar level and a regrading at the rear yard will be set back 5 feet from the rear lot line and will not diminish the spatial character of the central green space. And that the excavation and underpinning will be done in compliance with the Department of Buildings regulations under the supervision of a licensed professional engineer to protect the building and adjacent buildings. I recommend that the applicant continue to work with staff on all the details surrounding this project.
Great, thank you. And Commissioner Chu, would you second that motion?
Second.
Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Chu,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg,
Nay.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
With 7 in favor and 1 opposed, the motion passes.
We'll now move to our public hearing agenda, starting with public hearing item number 1. That's LPC 24-10008. This is an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 1931, Lot 10, 253 West 125th Street, the Apollo Theater, originally the Herdig and Siemens New Burlesque Theater. It's an individual and interior landmark. This is a neoclassical style theater building with classically inspired interior designed by George Keister and built in 1913 to 14. And the application is to use substitute materials and historic signage and to alter portions of the designated interior.
Good morning, Commissioners. Cass Stackelberg, Higgins, Quaysbarth and Partners. We're excited to share. We're excited to share this exciting project for rehabilitation work at the Apollo Theater. We've been working with the staff for quite some time. There's an extensive scope both on the exterior and the interior, some of which requires Commission approval, and we'll be sharing that with you today. I'll take you through the presentation, but I want to introduce the project team, and then Aldo Scrofani, the COO of the Apollo, is going to speak briefly about the importance of this project for the theater. On Zoom, we have Chris Cowan, who is the lead architect at Beyer Blinder Bell. Also here, Jared Schomer from Charcoal Blue, who are the theater consultants, and my colleague Sarah Schur. We're all available for questions that you may have, and answering questions as the project is described to you. So before I take you through the presentation, let me have Aldo speak a little bit about the project in its entirety.
Not as tall as Cass is, sorry. Do my best. Good morning. My name is Aldo Scrofani. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Apollo Theater. And I want to thank you, first of all, for giving us this opportunity to share our plans for the renovation and restoration of the Apollo. First, a little bit about the Apollo. The Apollo is an American culture treasure, and the Apollo Theater Foundation is a vibrant not-for-profit rooted in the Harlem community. We take great pride to engage people from New York, the nation, and the world. Since 1934, the Apollo has celebrated, created, and presented work that centers Black artists and voices from across the African diaspora. It has also been a catalyst of social and civic advocacy. Today, the Apollo is the largest performing arts institution committed to the Black culture and creativity. We are celebrating our 90th year anniversary this year, and we are embarking on a transformative time. Now, a little bit about the renovation and restoration. While we have spent some years in planning and working with top professionals for the renovation and restoration, it is especially meaningful to be doing so in our 90th year. Our efforts are focused on delivering an exceptional experience to all who visit the Apollo. This will be the first fully comprehensive renovation and restoration of the Apollo, and our aim is to optimize both the artist and patron experience, while also providing for our ability to expand our programming to further serve our community and our mission, and to keep the Apollo viable for another 90 years. The renovations will include the replacement and refurbishment of all of our seating throughout the building, numerous improvements in acoustics and sound distribution throughout the venue, significantly improve our air conditioning system and air distribution, installation of an automated rigging system and other safety improvements, refreshing of dressing rooms, and restoration and repair of the facade, and an expanded lobby to better serve the patrons, and also provide a destination for Harlemites and other visitors to explore the restored and expanded lobby, peruse our digital archives throughout the day while enjoying light snacks and refreshments. I want to thank you in advance for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Aldo. So a bit of orientation just to locate you. The Apollo Theater is a L-shaped building. It's got its main entry on 125th Street, and that's a long, narrow portion running north-south. And then the auditorium volume is located running east-west on 126th Street. The envelope of the building, it was designated as an individual landmark in 1983, and portions of the interior were also designated in 1983. An existing photo, two photos of the front facade on 125th Street. Just showing the current conditions, the neoclassical detailing, terracotta clad masonry, wood windows, cornice, and of course this prominent signage, the big blade sign that hangs off of the roof, and then the theater marquee and lettering signage on the top of the marquee. A few things just to point out. The marquee signage is LED panels on the three sides of the marquee that was approved under commission review back in 2006. And the storefronts as well, largely the base of the building was redone in 2006 along with extensive restoration work, all of which is going to be revisited as part of this project. The current project, including restoration treatments across the front facade, also includes a change really in technology to the signage on the exterior of the building. We'll get into the details of this in a minute, but similar to the change from the static individual hung letters to the LED panels, we are proposing to change the neon letters to LED neon, which you'll see in greater detail, and that'll actually have less of a visual effect on the appearance of the signage than perhaps the marquee change had, but it is a significant improvement for energy efficiency, but also just for the maintenance, for the Apollo's maintenance of this signage. And then, of course, there are changes on the interiors, as Aldo described, improvements for performers and patrons alike. I should also mention at this point, like our work with Landmark staff over the last year plus, we've been working closely with the State Historic Preservation Office as part of a historic tax credit application. And the Apollo is pursuing historic tax credits as part of this project. And we filed an application for those tax credits back in February, and the National Park Service certified the entire project just last month. And so everything you're seeing today has been reviewed both by the state and by the National Park Service and approved. You're actually seeing a subset. They're reviewing the entire project, even the non-designated interior spaces, and of course the envelope. You'll be looking at elements on the exterior, but also just the interior designated spaces. Some historical photographs just showing the evolution of the building. It opened as a Hertig and Siemens burlesque theater in the 1920s. It became known as the Apollo in the 1930s, and you can see the two photographs across the top show this large banjo-style signage on the north side of 125th Street on the front facade. The building became known as the Apollo in the late 20s, early 30s, but really sort of took on its current presence in 1934, 90 years ago. The photo on the lower left illustrates the marquee that was installed, we think sometime in the late 30s or early 40s, which is similar to what is there today. But of course, the change from the individual sort of hung letter traditional marquee signage that was replaced with the LED signage in the 2006 renovation, and then the Apollo neon signage sitting above that. And then the photo on the lower right, a designation photo from the late 1970s, just illustrating the building with its large blade sign off the roof and that prominent marquee. Addressing the signage on the marquee, two detail photos, both of the large blade sign and the two signs on top of the marquee, and the tracer lights on the top and bottom of the marquee, and then you can see a detail of the LED screens, this on the west-facing side of the marquee. That's on a good day. This is what is sort of often the case, and largely due to humidity and dampness, the letters themselves and the neon tubing shorts out. And that's happening at least twice a month, and has been for quite some time. And so these photos here illustrate what is often the case where individual letters have shorted out. The red strip lighting on the blade sign, even the blue lighting on the marquee often are out. And what that requires is for the Apollo to engage their sign contractor to come up, bring an 85-foot tall boom truck and close off the sidewalks. And it's a great expense for the Apollo, but it also results in an appearance on the outside of the building for the period of a day or two when the letters are out that makes the building just look like it's not being cared for, which really couldn't be further from the truth. And so the proposal is to replace just the neon tubing. The letter forms, the stainless steel letter forms remain, but the neon tubing itself with LED neon, which is a relatively new technology. And obviously the maintenance of this is significantly easier. But I'll also point out that the energy consumption for LED neon is about 1/10 of neon signage. And I also just learned recently that neon signage actually includes mercury vapor in it, which intensifies the color. So by changing from the neon to the LED neon, we're changing the energy output and improving efficiencies, but we're also able to get rid of the mercury that's part of the neon tubing. So some details to look at this. We've also done a mock-up. So the photos on the right, a day view and a night view on the right. We swapped out the L and the O for the neon LED neon. So one can see the two L's. The L on the left is neon. The L on the right is LED neon. And the two details on the far left image of the slide are comparable sections. So what this is illustrating is that the letter form in which the tubing sits will remain, and we just need to replace the tubing itself. And dimensionally, the tube, the neon tube and the LED tube are basically the same dimension. They're about a 1/16 of an inch difference. Visually, they're quite similar. We can also adjust the intensity of the LED to get it sort of quieter and sort of closer to the appearance of the neon signage as it appears. We're also proposing to use the same technology for the blue lighting that wraps the top and bottom of the marquee, as well as the large blade sign. That's the exterior scope that's under commission review. The majority of this project is happening on the interior, though, and really a series of enhancements to improve artists and audience experience. So these are two plans from the LPC designation report for the interior from 1983. The plan on the left shows that the lobby and the auditorium is part of the designation. Interestingly, the designation report barely describes the lobby itself. It just simply says that the entrance to the L-shaped building is located in the western half of West 125th Street and leads to the theater lobby, remodeled in the 1930s and 60s, with montages of Apollo performers and a theater office and a ticket booth. So there's really almost no description about the lobby, but what is there today really are clearly non-historic finishes. And the balance of the designation report speaks about the auditorium, the finishes, and then also enumerates in the 1980s the long list of amazing performers that have appeared through the 1980s at the Apollo. So some existing photographs to illustrate the current conditions. These are two photographs looking east and west in the vestibule right off of 125th Street. The finishes in this space date to the 2000s renovation. That's a project that our office and Buyer Blinder Bell worked on. And you can see there's a small box office and LED screens with changing information about performances current and upcoming. Turning into the lobby itself, on the left is a view north, and on the right is a view south. And what you see in the lobby today are finishes that we think date to the 70s or early 80s. There's a stucco barrel vaulted ceiling, mirrored panels on the walls, along with those historic montages, non-historic wainscoting, non-historic carpeting, and non-historic lighting. Signage has been added sort of in an accretive manner over time. Some more detailed photos. The photo on the upper left and in the middle on the top. This is what is currently sort of used as the publicly accessed area, which is a small gift shop. And then the photo on the upper right just illustrates the condition of the floor when the carpeting was replaced in 2006. And you can see what was a historic terrazzo floor has been coated and patched extensively. So the historic terrazzo, we know, has lost its integrity. And then photos across the lower register of the slide, the montages on the right with images of past performers, the view in the middle back to this elevator lobby, and then the detail photo on the right, just looking up to, it's a little hard to see, but it's illustrating through that egg crate lighting on the perimeter of that barrel vaulted ceiling. Just you're looking right up to the underside of the slab. There are no remaining plaster finishes across the ceiling. Historic photographs of the interior actually have been quite helpful in guiding the design work that's proposed here. And the photo on the left, I think, in addition to showing the historic montages that were there in the 1940s and 50s, also shows this large aggregate terrazzo floor. But also you begin to see in that photo, and then more clearly in the photo on the right, the neoclassical detailing that carried through the lobby historically. And you can see these fluted piers, this tall stone wainscot, this bay rhythm that carries across from the piers to the coffered ceiling, some probably 1940s era lighting, and then what looked to be maybe a metallic finished auditorium doors at the far end of the lobby looking to the north. And this image these images have served the team to work toward a new lobby design. Just briefly, the plan on the left, which is derived from the designation plan, just illustrates what we understand to be basically a simple RCP diagram of the lobby. So you had a very small vestibule and then a bay structure with 9 individual bays continuing from south to north, organized by those pilasters and the ceiling coffers. Our proposed RCP plan, which accommodates or accounts for a much larger vestibule as it is currently, looks to sort of repeat that bay rhythm, but putting a bit more prominence in bays 1 and 6, which is the entry bay at 1 where you come in through the vestibule, and then 6, which is the area accessing the elevator lobby and then directly into the auditorium. So in rendering, in plan form, sorry, this is the existing and proposed plan. And one change that we will are proposing to make is an opening, and I'll just point to this here, an opening in this area here where that current sort of fixture where the gift shop is. This is just a flat plaster wall. We're proposing an opening to connect the lobby to this new public space, which is a cafe space, which will allow the public, but also patrons before and after performances to gather. There'll be a cafe, there'll be even some performances in that space, but it allows the Apollo to provide a gathering space that doesn't exist today. So as you come in to the auditorium or to the lobby before a performance, it's very crowded. This allows some spillover space into that area. We're also will be activating the storefront window, which will also allow views into this space. So that's this area here, which was part of the 2006 renovation, but really hasn't been activated as a transparent connection for the street into the interior. So 2 very important changes that we're proposing as part of this renovation. And so this rendering is looking sort of just as you come in from the vestibule, looking north toward the auditorium doors, the stair up to the upper balcony, and this portal through this flat plaster wall, which will connect the main lobby space with this new cafe space. And a few things to describe here. I think looking at the lobby space, you begin to see, and I have another rendering which will illustrate this as well, you begin to see the sort of abstracted neoclassical detailing that we've used working off of that historic photograph, the sort of bay rhythm with the fluted piers and the coffered ceiling, contemporary lighting, a new terrazzo, black terrazzo floor with heavy brass inlays, and the pattern is derived from that iconic Apollo signage that's on the marquee, laid across the floor and inset into the terrazzo. And then you can see this opening that's marked by a strip of terrazzo and this portal, which then leads to this new cafe area outside the designated space. I'll also just make a point that the way we've designed this opening with these sort of curved shoulders, we think is an important distinction. It's important to distinguish this opening from the architecture within the historic lobby. So whereas in the lobby, there are clear orthogonal sort of classically derived forms, this portal has a curvilinear form to it, which is clearly distinct. And so we want to make that distinction between the historic space of the lobby as well as the sort of passing into this new space. This curvilinear form also then is picked up in the curvilinear nature of the signage, the iconic Apollo signage, and even from the marquee, the sort of curvilinear nature of the marquee on the outside. So another rendering now looking south with your back to the auditorium doors, looking back toward the vestibule. That opening on the far left accesses the elevator lobby directly to the balcony and mezzanine levels above, but you maybe more clearly can see the treatments across the lobby with the bay rhythm, the sort of fluted piers and wainscoting, the coffered ceiling with hidden recessed lighting, and then these circular contemporary fixtures. Along the east wall will be the montages. Those are obviously being saved and reinstalled. On the west wall will be mirrored panels, one of which will actually have a screen behind that mirror panel, which will have information about the current performance and upcoming performances. But you get a sense that the idea here is to work off of those historic photographs, but in an abstracted sort of classical language, to really sort of energize and enhance this lobby, this designated lobby space. This is a rendering now looking back to the auditorium doors, which will be metal finished with etched brass with Apollo letters incised into it. And then just the materiality, so across the bottom of this slide, the black terrazzo with the brass inlay, brass accents throughout, white stone base to the wainscoting. The plasterwork across the perimeter walls will be in a GFRG, which is a glass fiber reinforced gypsum. It's a bit more durable material than just straight plaster. And then an image of the circular pendant lighting, which will sit within each of these coffered bays. An existing elevation throughout the lobby as it stands today. As I mentioned, none of the finishes in this space are historic. And then proposed elevations. So across the top is the east wall. From right to left is the vestibule area, now with a single window for the box office, that portal connecting the lobby space to this adjacent cafe space, the stairs then leading to the balcony and mezzanine and elevator lobby. And then on the bottom of the slide, the west wall, so within the vestibule with the screens, and then these mirrored panels with just this center panel having an LED screen behind it for display of information about the current and future performances. I'll also just mention that the opening, we've looked at sort of other treatments and other commission approvals for openings of interior spaces to connect them to adjacent non-designated spaces. And just in 2019, the commission approved a similar change at the Martin Beck Theater, where it was a connection really to improve circulation and enhance the sort of patron experience, connecting the designated interior lobby space to an adjacent non-designated space. There have been other similar approvals, Immigrant Savings Bank right over here on Chambers Street, and even that was back in 2020, and a bit older at the Plaza Hotel, another approval for connections to improve egress and circulation and really sort of the visitor experience. So this is not an unprecedented change that we're looking to make. Some details, again, looking at that historic photograph and some of the detailing of the individual elements of a single bay, the marble base across the lower portion of the walls, the fluted GFRG wainscoting, the mirrored panel, fluted pilasters, and then the ceiling treatment with this simple coffering, which will hide diffusers for the air conditioning system, lighting, and then the pendant fixture above. Additional details and elevations. The upper left is looking back toward the vestibule. There's a new door proposed, which will access the fire command center right at the entry to the theater lobby. Looking back to the north, the stair up to the balcony, the doors into the auditorium, and then the elevation adjacent to the entry to the elevator lobby. Some details on the doors. The existing doors are wood. They're relatively low. The proposal is to make them a bit taller. We're going to go from 6 leaves to 5 leaves to accommodate ADA clearances. And the new doors will be metal with a brass finish with the Apollo letters incised into them. Some signage is incorporated into this proposal as well. It's really wayfinding signage, just highlighting the balcony, the mezzanine, and the orchestra levels. That's been done in kind of an accretive manner over time. And the proposal is to do a small 6-inch letter, about a 1/2 inch thick, with a face lit hanging off an illuminated raceway. And that will be right over the stair leading up to the balcony, adjacent to the mezzanine, and then into the entry into the orchestra. Turning to the auditorium, this is an existing view, obviously standing on the stage, looking back into the auditorium. I'll point out those giant speakers, which is one of the things that we are addressing, both in terms of overall acoustic treatments, but also introducing smaller fill speakers on the undersides of the balcony and mezzanine to improve sound quality within the theater. The chairs that you see here, the seating, that all dates to 2006, as well as a lot of the other equipment, but largely the elements that you see here are more or less the same post designation. A photograph from the 1940s. This is amateur night at the Apollo in 1944. And just a few things to point out. The theater looks very similar as it does in this photograph. You can make out the pattern carpeting. Currently, it's just a flat red carpet. We're going to be replacing that. And around the perimeter walls, you can see marble wainscoting, different than the wainscoting that there's there today, but these sort of vertically oriented sconces, and even maybe some framed paintings on the back of the orchestra. The designation photos from the 1980s, show a very different interior. These are photos from the 1980s from Landmarks collection, where it appears that the entire interior of the auditorium had been overpainted in white, and a sort of a very different appearance than it has today. Some detailed photos of the existing conditions. As I mentioned, the seating, all of that was replaced in the 2006 renovation. The upper right photograph shows the low partitions at the back of the orchestra seating. This is a scagliola detail, which is basically it's a faux painted finish over plaster to mimic marble, ancient treatment. Those elements remain at the back of the orchestra. The photo on the lower left shows exit signs, but also just point out the marble set between the entry enfranements. That is all, we think, circa 1970s, early 80s marble. You see it throughout the building, in the auditorium, in the offices. It's the same marble, and it was all done, we think, at some renovation prior to designation. And then the photo on the lower, in the middle, on the lower register, is a paint mock-up that was done back in 2006, and this scheme was developed by, I don't know if anybody knows Joe Bravey of Ernest Newman Studios, so a decorative painter. He developed this in conjunction with the Apollo. This was actually approved by Landmarks, but never actually executed. So as part of this project, that paint scheme will actually be reestablished and used throughout the interiors. And it's really meant to evoke the sort of period finishes that would have been in place at the theater circa 1930. The back of the orchestra, you're looking at the back of what is a bar fixture on wheels at the back of the orchestra, which creates some significant circulation issues during performances. And then just on the other side of this wall here is the sound and lighting position. So that sound and lighting position obviously integral to the performances that take place. And what we're looking to do is actually eliminate the bar and move that sound and lighting position back to where the bar is today, which will have some significant improvement for patrons and for the Apollo. A view of the ceiling of the auditorium, you can see non-historic lighting throughout the sort of undersized pendant fixture hanging from that central medallion. You'll also see the diffusers, which are set sporadically both in flat plaster but also into decorative plaster. And part of the overall scope here is improving the air conditioning in the auditorium, and we'll be eliminating and replacing these diffusers with new diffusers that will only go through flat plaster, and we'll be restoring all the impacted areas of decorative plaster that you can see in this photograph. An existing and proposed plan at the orchestra level, again, taking that sound and lighting position, shifting it to that back wall and eliminating the bar. That's really what's called out here. That also allows the Apollo to introduce about 25, 30 new seats at the back of the orchestra, which is obviously important income for the theater. Some details on that treatment, new seating to match the adjacent, match the existing, some photographs of the bar and the sound and lighting position, and then some materials. So on the far right of this slide, you can see just the materials that will be part of the sound and lighting position: a granite counter, a burgundy laminate face, and then a black laminate kick plate across the bottom. And those finishes will be used elsewhere in fixtures on the mezzanine and balcony level. The fabric panels that are around the perimeter walls of the auditorium, those are going to be replaced, and we'll talk a bit more about the acoustic treatments in just a minute, but it'll be replaced with burgundy panels which match what's there. The flooring currently, the carpeting was replaced in 2006 with just a flat red maroon rug carpet. There's also a tile underneath the seats because patrons can bring drinks to their seats. So there's a desire to have a more resilient flooring under the seating. So the proposal is to have a much more animated carpet, sort of not dissimilar to what was there in that historic photograph, and similarly a more sort of figurative animated tile underneath the seating. Elsewhere on the mezzanine level, just a view of some of the non-historic finishes in this level. On the upper left, you can see the bar fixture there. That's going to be redone, made smaller, and it'll have the same finish as the sound and lighting position below. You can see that called out in existing and proposed plan here. We're also removing 2 rows of seats in the back of the mezzanine, which have obstructive views and also impact circulation around that bar area. At the mezzanine, so this is now up at the upper portion of the house, you can see that same marble paneling around the perimeter, non-historic, and the historic scagliola at the back of the seating at the mezzanine level. There are also openings, sort of unframed openings that we're treating and adding in some framing elements to sort of make the transitions between the walls and the openings a bit cleaner. Existing and proposed balcony treatments, just illustrating the change to the bar and the openings to the stair. And then some RCPs, again, just illustrating the improvements that are being made through the house, both for air conditioning, sound, and lighting. So all of the new insertions, both the diffusers, the small downlights, and even the small fill speakers, all those are being attached to the underside of the balcony mezzanine, only at flat plaster. And we think will make a significant difference for the patrons' experience. So a series of RCPs just illustrating where those elements are going, and then the main ceiling of the auditorium, larger diffusers, more strategically located, both in the sail vault but also across the main ceiling. Diffusers, linear diffusers around the perimeters as well in some locations. Exit signs, which represent a range of different eras, will all be replaced with code compliant, consistent exit signage. No historic fabric will be impacted by the installation of the exit signs. Lighting, there are a range of contemporary sort of historicizing fixtures that have been installed throughout the theater. Many of them predate designation. They are not historic to the theater, and we think actually really not particularly sympathetic with the character of the theater. And we think that then provides an opportunity similar to the lobby to introduce contemporary lighting in the space. So the photo on the upper left is just looking up at the existing pendant. And what we're proposing is a contemporary fixture in glass and brass, which will be a central fixture, pendant fixture in the auditorium, but also smaller pendant fixtures around the back of the orchestra, which will provide a little bit of scale and we think vitality to the space. So this is an early rendering of this fixture at the center of the auditorium space, and the one in the upper right off the back of the orchestra, and then these vertical sconces similar to the historic vertical sconces that you could see in that 1940s photograph around the perimeter of the auditorium. And finally, the last chapter of the story here is about acoustics. So currently, there are well, they're not even acoustic panels. They're fabric panels that are just installed around the perimeter of the auditorium. They're on a sort of a wood batten system, and they really don't provide sufficient sound dampening, particularly for the low frequency amplified music that's used in the theater a lot. But as part of the changing programming, there'll obviously be that same music, but there's also going to be spoken word. So there's a need for a very robust acoustic treatments throughout the theater. And what we've done is we've looked at the areas behind where they're accessible behind the fabric panels. And what one sees are these plaster walls that seem to have perhaps a historic paint finish, but are in very poor condition, both in terms of moisture infiltration, but areas where BX has been sort of cut into the plaster to channel outlets and other electrified systems. And then the batten system attached back to the wall. And what we also found in looking at this is a distinction between the Apollo and a lot of Broadway houses. The Apollo, the sort of the box of the auditorium itself is on masonry. So it's just a masonry box, whereas a lot of Broadway theaters are plaster on lath. So they're sort of a little bit more forgiving. So this house is actually, as the acoustician has described, to be much stiffer. So there's a need to actually provide a bit more acoustical treatment here than one might see in a typical Broadway house. So that informs some of the decisions that we've made about treatments around the perimeter walls. I'm happy to talk more about this if you have any questions. But a series of elevations here, north, south, and west throughout the auditorium. And what you'll see, things that are coded FP, those are just new fabric panels. And that's the majority of what's being installed. But across the upper register of the north, the west, and the south walls, we're proposing acoustical panels as well, which are dimensional. They're 6-inch deep, but they're set off the walls in a way that clearly sort of makes them this new insertion, and they're entirely reversible. But they're providing a very important acoustical quality to the theater. So this is now looking back at the upper portion, so you can see the fabric panels at the back of the orchestra, the mezzanine, and then the lower portion of the balcony. We're proposing to actually remove that non-historic marble paneling across the base of the walls on the balcony to provide a bit more acoustical properties with the fabric panels. And then the upper register of the back of the balcony will also have these acoustical panels. And so an existing photo on the left and a rendered view on the right looking across the mezzanine. So you can see across the upper wall, sort of looking specifically at this insertion, these acoustical panels on the upper portion. And so they have a 4-inch gap between them. They're really not meant to be sort of an architectural treatment. They're meant to be what they are, sort of clearly visible, but finished in the same burgundy panel as the wall panels below, and will enhance the acoustical properties of the auditorium significantly. You can also see enhanced lighting across the ceiling and the underside of the balcony in this rendering. And then just a section just illustrating the conditions up at the photographs illustrating the conditions up the balcony where you have those fabric panels and then the non-historic marble. We're proposing to take away the marble, which is obviously a very non-sound absorptive material, carry the fabric panels to the floor, and introduce these acoustical panels on the upper register of the walls at the back of the balcony and elsewhere in the auditorium. So finally, wrapping up, so again, this rendering of the auditorium, these improvements we think will have very modest visual impact, but will have significant impacts both for patrons and performers in the theater space, and will really enhance this highly significant landmark. And then turning to the outside, obviously there's an extensive scope of restoration work. We're working with the staff on that. And then this, just the introduction of the LED neon at the blade sign and the marquee, which we hope will ensure that the Apollo continues to shine for another 90 years and many more beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Do we have questions, commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Goldblum.
Am I wrong, or are you not touching that little vestibule? Are you doing, what's the scope of work in that little vestibule where the ticket window is?
I can go back to that. It's quite limited. The box office, which currently has 2 windows,
Right.
will go down to 1, in part because people aren't typically walking up and purchasing tickets any longer.
But the wall finishes stay the same? That gray, whatever it is?
Chris, you're on the line.
Yes, I am. Hi, Chris Cowan.
You just speak to the
principal.
wall finishes in the
Sure. Yes. So the plan for the entry vestibule is to use a pixelated graphic on the wall in place of that gray fabric of a historic performer, kind of large scale. And we have something like similar to that at the back of the lobby. Right before you walk into the theater on the right side. We probably have a view of that in the rendering. Not exactly the same, but referencing, keep going, let's keep going. There on the right, there you can see there's like a blown up photograph on the right side near that monitor. So it would be something along those lines. We'll still have the display monitors in the lobby advertising upcoming shows, as you see in that existing photo. They'll be more properly framed and recessed. What you see in that lobby now was done in 2005, 2006, but it was not finished due to funding issues. So it's been like that for almost 20 years. So we're going to finish that space and enliven it and really invite people into the vestibule with some interesting images there.
Yes, Commissioner Lutfi.
So this is actually a perfect slide because I've been thinking about the floor. So the original floor, which was severely deteriorated, was sort of your typical understated terrazzo floor that we all, are used to seeing in many, many places. And, historically it's reminiscent of, what went in during that time period. So now, while the design includes a terrazzo floor, the floor is a lot more dramatic in terms of design and color. And I just wanted to get a sense of what the thinking was behind that, since it doesn't really speak to what was there, except from a materiality standpoint.
Well, I'll start this discussion. I'm sure others, I don't know, Jared, if you want to add in, or Chris, but I think, looking at the overall treatment of the lobby, it's clearly a contemporary space. It's sort of, there are elements of the historic that we're using as sort of cues as a launching off point for this kind of abstraction. But I think there's also, as we've seen, kind of an opportunity to sort of animate this space in a way that's very different than it is today. And so the floor is part of that. It's going to have a sort of a neutral black terrazzo, but obviously the inlay brass strips, which are part of any terrazzo floor, are used to sort of replicate some of the Apollo signage on the outside. Really, it's just sort of sense of place and animation. I don't know, Jared, do you want to speak to more of that?
Hi, everyone. Jared Schomer, Charcoal Blue. We're the theater and acoustics consultant on the project, and we're doing the interior design for the lobby as well. And working with the Apollo Theater for the past few years, we have been really inspired by their visual brand. They've asked us to bring their visual brand into the architecture of the space. And that's what led to the terrazzo treatment on the floor, to bring that brass inlay, the iconic shape of the Apollo A and the font from the marquee, kind of bringing that in to animate the interior of the space as well. And so it starts with the floor, but it's actually in a lot of the signage and graphics that we're looking at throughout the space as well. The idea is to kind of tie the historic aspect of the left side of the lobby into the modern operation of a contemporary performing arts operator in the space. So the right side of the lobby being the more modern space, and the left side of the lobby being the historic protected space.
And
yes, please
and
go
then
ahead.
while you're at it, can you speak to those doors a little bit as well? Because it looks like there's the lettering.
Yeah, that's a similar element. So the blade sign, the font of Apollo from the blade sign is intended to be etched into metal on the Apollo entry doors to the auditorium. So it's, again, bringing an element of the exterior iconography of the Apollo Theater into the interior architecture.
And what are the existing doors into the auditorium?
I can speak to that. They're non-original. They're hollow core wood doors, replacements during some time period. We're not sure exactly when, but they're just not. I'm not going to say Home Depot, but they're not high quality doors. They're hollow core metal wood doors.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me I can go back to that one historic photo we have. We don't know for sure. So looking at this photograph here, those are the doors. They appear to have a shine to them, so like they may have been metallic historically, but that's all we have to go on.
Typically, those doors were calamine, which means they were rated, so they had metal cladding on top of them. And we've all seen these older
makes
doors.
sense.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
other-
think I think one of the ideas too, this is Chris again, is really to draw people back, to the theater from when they enter the lobby. So the idea was to really design those doors so they're a focal point. And I think the idea of as Jared was saying, the idea of the inlaid brass in the terrazzo floor is kind of speaking to, motion and movement. There's a lot of dance done at the Apollo, a lot of movement. And, I think that was also an idea to really pull you back to the theater, which you can see the terrazzo floor on the left in this historic photo, as you guys said. It was fairly simple originally, but the idea was to try to really make it a little bit more vibrant and kinetic.
Commissioner Chu.
So I think maybe you started talking about how this was approached from what was historic and what was new. And it sounded like I heard that the theater proper, you're trying to respect the historic character of that space, but the lobby entry sequence is a contemporary experience. Would that be correct in what your approach is?
So what I would say is it's definitely a contemporary experience, but I think, what's there today is not significant and not historic. So we have a decision to make. So how do we inform a new design?
Right.
And I think, whether you're working in the context of a historic district and you're putting in a new building, or you're working in the context of a historic building and you're putting in a new feature, I think looking to the sort of historic documentation that's there is a good way to sort of begin to guide the design. So in looking at these photographs, and we don't typically have good photographs for theater lobbies. So I think what's interesting is no historic photos of the earliest Hertig and Seaman era, but during the Apollo, understandably, they're actually very good pictures of people queuing up. And so we have this we understand the architectural language, we understand the sort of organization of the space in terms of these individual bays. And so using that as the sort of beginning point for a contemporary space. So it's compatible with the character of the theater, but we think sort of is contemporary in its nature, both in terms of the way the different architectural elements are rendered, the lighting. I think even the floor, frequently terrazzo is a very sort of small aggregate, sort of it's a background, right? But in this photograph, you can see actually this was a large aggregate terrazzo, which is a different kind of feel. It's a much more animated feel. So maybe that's a bridge to where we are, where we're headed. But I think it's not what you might see in sort of a typical lobby or elevator lobby, which is just maybe a border and a flat sort of simple treatment. So this space, it had animation, it had signage, it has these murals, which were there historically and are there today as a very important part of the lobby. But we see this as sort of an opportunity to work off of the historic language or architectural language, but to introduce sort of a contemporary reading of that. So it's sort of a blend, if that's the answer to the question. It's a mix of this sort of historically inspired, but a contemporary space.
That does help me. I guess when I look at the rendering of the lobby, when you're walking towards a theater, the view that would be equivalent to the right photo. Maybe it's a shot that, yeah, perfect. Thank you. The treatment of the stair, which sends you up to the balcony level, has been diminished in its significance in the expression of this lobby into almost a secondary access. Whereas if you look at the historic picture, the walls, the way the ceiling folds down to the wall has been, I guess it lost some of its nuance. And I'm just wondering if there are ways to bring that back. Because I understand the story you're telling, and I can see that could be an approach. But if I could feel that experience, a lot of times the history in these places, and I think the Apollo is included, a lot of the energy was actually in this space, this hustle and bustle, walking to the theater, all the people, this is where a lot of the energy was. And I just wish I could feel some of that history here. I feel like the current proposal, I don't sense that anymore. I can see that the room to the right, which I think is a great addition. I totally commend all the moves in general here, and I think theaters all need all these things that you're putting in. They all need them. They need these amenities. This is a great spot. I do wonder if you have security. That's just a side question, and that affects the procession of entering the theater. A lot of theaters, when they renovate, they have to accommodate the things that security, equipment, et cetera, and process change in terms of your experience. And I'm guessing you guys have worked that out, and that will create a big log jam right here at the entry to your nice space and your stair going up. But I do think that the historic procession had a clarity that I feel was a little lost here. And I think the opportunity to recall the historic doors, and as you were saying, you want to draw people there. I kind of wish I had a sense of what used to be there to go to. And then I enter that theater and I get what is essentially, you guys have retained the historic theater interior. My questions there are more about color palette, because the red is very dominant. And if that in fact was the historic color, I think there's more strength to that as being the proposed. The seat and the carpet and the walls are very strong as the red. And if that has precedent, I can feel that. But when I look at the pictures, the picture that you showed was beautiful of the 40s. There was texture in the wall. There was the fabrics had detail and texture to them. They weren't so flat. And I just wonder if that could be brought back. They're just fabric panels for the most part. I am also just the one comment I have to say about the theaters, I am concerned a lot about the acoustic absorptive panels on the top. I feel like they're very additive. And I know that they could be achieved to be integral into the wall. The walls had a very vertical batten reading to them, and it disturbs me that the square reading on there. I think it can be detailed where those can be recessed, not added, and they can be absorptive and they can be reflective below just by whatever's behind the fabric. That's something we do all the time in theaters. So I would ask you if that's been explored, and has it?
So let me respond to
Yeah,
your
yeah,
question.
there are a lot of
in
questions. I'm
in
sorry.
reverse order. So the issue with the acoustical panels
Yeah.
is their depth, and what we don't want to do is carve into the walls.
Okay.
So their depth is sort of established by the properties that they have to provide.
Okay.
So that sort of dictates them sort of sitting on a framework.
Mhm.
In terms of patterning, that's something that we could look at in terms of detailing them. But right now, the perimeter walls are sort of it's a fabric panel, and so we're working off of that palette and that treatment. But in terms of insetting them, that I don't think we'd be able to do, just given sort of the nature of the perimeter walls as masonry walls.
Or
But
deployable curtains and banners explored that won't be so permanent.
right,
because-
I'll let Jared speak to the various treatments that have been
Okay.
explored. I also want to just come back to the lobby before Jared speaks, because I think what's important, let me just go to the comparative plans. There really is, it's really just finishes that are changing. So this idea of procession really is sort of unchanged from the existing, and even we think from the historic. I mean, the stairs that are there are two sets of stairs where you come in currently. There's this sort of gift shop area here. This stair goes up to the balcony. This stair goes up to the mezzanine, and then this is the entry into the orchestra. That's the same sort of organization as we understand was there historically, and is what we're maintaining. So there really isn't a change to the. It's a very narrow space where you have a long shot down to the orchestra doors, and then off to the east side are two sets of stairs that sort of stack over one another, going to the high balcony and the lower and the mezzanine. So
maybe my comment was taken too severely. My comments are really about finishes and minor interior detailing. My comment about that stair is, if you just look back at the historic picture again and look at the proposal, it's just about the articulation. Even you see how it on the right side there. Yeah, it really just it envelops the stair, and you go up into this element, and it's gracious. And now it's been chopped off with a sign that hangs right over the stair, and I feel like that has lost something It also does help me say, I'm going to the stair and now I'm going through this beautiful new room that you've created that was never there. And I agree with your argument that it shouldn't be trying to replicate as if it were originally there, but I think it does set up a sort of experiences for a patron to move through the space. It doesn't really change the planning at all. It's really just some detailing up at the top. Yes, that's what I'm responding to.
Yeah.
And it's not, and I also would say it's not about what's there now. It's just this opportunity to maybe recall the history since it's all being redone.
Yeah.
Could be a chance to do that.
Can we address the acoustics?
Yes, please.
question? Let me try and run quickly to that rendering and have Jared speak to the sort of different options that were considered and how we arrived at this.
Yeah, so the room as surveyed does, as Cass referred to earlier, exhibit an extreme character of low frequency noise buildup in the space. It's not something that can be dealt with your typical deployment of fabric treatments. So an acoustic banner system would not take care of the extreme low frequency that the room exhibits. So what we are proposing here is actually a hard framed low frequency panel absorber. Normally we would, as Stephen said, I think recess those into a wall surface. And in fact, in many historic theaters, the walls naturally provide that low frequency absorption because the plaster is removed and there's airspace between the masonry wall and the plaster surface. So in this case, we have to create that airspace essentially. And that's why we have to build out from the walls so that we don't remove the historic plaster that's still behind the panels, and so that we don't have to go into the masonry wall itself. We do have a limited amount of egress width on the staircases that hug the walls, and so we can't build that out in a kind of uniform way so that it continues all the way down to the floor. So that's why we chose to, in a way, make these, as Cass said, not anything more than what they are. They're serving an acoustic purpose. They're a framed panel that is attached to the wall surface. They can be removed at some future date if the programming changes and they're no longer doing so much amplified performance or so much performance that involves low frequency noise. And so that's how we landed on the solution that we have.
Okay, and the palette is based on the existing palette, which was, some of it was partially pre-approval, earlier approval that was partially realized. Okay.
The red was original.
Picked up in the 2006.
Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Lutfi, and then Commissioner Chen, and then Commissioner Lutfi.
Just to Commissioner Chu's point, I think what is lost, obviously, is that it's not only the detailing. I think because my concern was with the lighting, because it's very subjective. Lighting is but one of the things that stood out very strongly on the lobby is this processional ceiling. If you go back to the original lobby, the series of lighting on the lobby sort of is the procession leading to the main door at the back. And so I think that's where I totally understand, Commissioner Chu, that you get the sense of you have this new space, but if you look at the ceiling, the lighting on the ceiling, there's a directional procession that leads you, that's the main space, and then there's a side staircase to go to the right. And so also both the terrazzo flooring and the brass sort of lead you. Now it's you veer off you're doing a turn to the right. You're not, this is a historic feature. And so that balance of.
And again, that's a soffit detail, but a pop-up, more modern cove lighting creates, to me, stop points, like stopping as opposed to flow, because they become pockets, punches, as opposed to just flowing down. If you look at the historic, even this gentle curve at the ceiling, you notice to the wall, brings me down in a gracious way.
Okay. All right, and I think Commissioner Lutfi had a question, but she had to step out. Any other questions at this moment? All right, why don't we move to public testimony, and we may have more questions after that. So is there anyone in the room who wishes to speak on this item? And noting that there isn't, I'm going to turn it over to Gregory Kalla to see if we have any remote participants.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We have a couple of remote participants in our attendees list. The first we'll be hearing from is Christina Conroy from the Victorian Society of New York. Christina Conroy, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. Please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society, New York. Now, founded in New York City in 1966, the Victorian Society in America is dedicated to fostering the appreciation and preservation of our 19th and early 20th century heritage. The New York chapter promotes preservation of our historic districts, individual and scenic landmarks, interior and civic art. It appears to us that few, if any, historic features and finishes remain in the lobby. The changes proposed will restore some missing features, such as the pilasters, wall paneling, and coved ceilings. This is appropriate as far as it goes. We wish it went further. There are 3 major changes proposed to the lobby that should be revised. The large opening proposed into the adjacent non-designated space will signify and inappropriately affect and dilute the room's historic form and integrity. Installation of piers dividing this opening into sections would mitigate this change and would help maintain the historic rhythm of the wall divisions formed by the recreated pilasters. The abstract terrazzo floor pattern doesn't relate to the architecture of the lobby and seems to fight against it. It has no significant historical significance or relevance to the theater. It should be revised to support the proposed and historic design of the lobby and the theater. The large LED ring lights proposed for the ceiling have become cliche. Surely something more fitting can be found for this historic space. Now to the exterior Apollo lighting sign. First, there must be no confusion. There is no such thing as LED neon. There is LED lighting and there is neon lighting. They are different and they look different. Nothing matches the glow of neon. Neon is an historic but still available technology. Neon is historic to this location and is especially important historically to theaters and their marquees. The making of neon signs requires craftsmanship, and the Commission should care about and encourage the retention of historic technologies and traditional craftsmanship and use of historic materials. It would be a tragedy to destroy the essence of these historic signs by converting them to plastic LED strip lights. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, we'll be hearing from Claudette Brady from Save Harlem Now. Claudette Brady, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. Please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you. Hello,
Hi.
Claudette Brady, are you
Okay.
with us?
Yeah. Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. My mute and unmute kept flashing on and off. Good morning. My name is Claudette Brady. I am the executive director of Save Harlem Now. First, I would like to commend the Apollo for its efforts to restore and renovate most arguably the most important venue when it comes to introducing new artists to the modern music scene in America and around the world. I'm going to limit my comments today to the acoustic panels because there's just so much. One of the things that we view with historic theaters is the opulence and the richness of the finishes within the theater space and the lobby environment. I would suggest to the designers that they look to use more traditional brocade or jacquard fabric in covering those acoustic panels rather than a flat weave. The flat weave takes away from that rich, opulent experience that we have in historic theaters. Also with the lobby, I think we need to look, I understand the need to modernize the space and add new amenities such as a bar area. However, part of going to historic theater is the entranceway where when you walk in and you are awed by its elegance and its rich design. I would say to the team to look back and see if they cannot incorporate some of that legacy richness that we are used to in historic theaters in this new design. Thank you and have a good afternoon.
Okay. Thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, we will be hearing from Lucy Levine from the Historic Districts Council. Lucy Levine, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. Okay. And once you're a panelist, please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HDC commends and supports this lovely and appropriate interior restoration. We ask that the applicants consider possible use of historic neon for signage before deferring to LED. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I do not see any further hands raised in the attendees list, so I will note for the record that Manhattan Community Board 10 recommends approval and also encourages all parties involved in the upgrade, restoration, and reconstruction of the theater to actively seek out and utilize minority and women business enterprises firms in all phases of the project, from planning and design to construction and completion. And with that, I'll bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Great, thank you. Would you like to respond to the comments?
So just briefly on the neon, Aldo was just whispering to me, actually to himself. Yes, we've tried for many years. So I think the move from the neon to the LED is, it is a visual change. But I think if you put it in the context, for instance, of the changes that the commission approved, even at the marquee, this is actually a much subtler change, and it comes with significant benefits, both environmental but also for the institution itself. I also want to just sort of touch on the discussion about the lobby, but also about the acoustical panels and this idea of sort of introducing sort of decorative elements across the face of the panels, or even sort of recalling more exactly some of the detailing that one sees in the historic photographs. I think the commission understands that sort of abstraction is an acceptable approach to new design. And I think one of the challenges we've had as a team is sort of balancing the commissioner's approach to this and the ideas of appropriateness, and the Secretary of the Interior standards, which we're dealing with the other agency that we have to also satisfy. And the National Park Service is very specific about not replicating historic elements when you don't have a lot of detail. We have those photographs, but that isn't really, we would need drawings to replicate and sort of go back. And I think some of the testimony and maybe even some of the discussion, looking back and sort of, could you get closer to that historic condition? I think we're really limited by the standards, by what we can do. But conversely, at the same time, working with a commission and understanding appropriateness, we've taken an approach that both satisfies the standards, but I think through this sort of more abstracted treatment creates a space that is compatible with the historic character of the building, but is also appropriate for its use for what goes on in this space. It's really a cultural landmark in many ways. And we think we've sort of found a balance between those two things. So I'll leave it at that. Happy to.
Okay, thank you. And I think Commissioner Lutfi, you had a question earlier.
This is a little bit of a content question in terms of some of the imaging. I realize these are placeholders. I just want to look at a few slides. So when you go to, oh, of course, my screen is frozen now. But when you go back to one of those very early Getty images.
For the exterior?
Yeah, oh, here, this one.
Oh.
And that one, that's beautiful. So there was a discussion about, you know, the new design and the energy that it brings in from the outside and a lot of and how it generates that energy as you enter now through the new design. And, you know, as we see here, part of the energy that was in the lobby was actually also on the walls, in addition to in addition to the people coming in, which that energy is just going to come. But it's you know, just evocative. I mean, you feel energized by the images of the people who performed here, and they kind of hits you right away in a wonderful way, along with some really terrific typography, etc. So I noticed that in your renderings that follow, you use that on some of the walls, right here. But I think it would be great to have an understanding of what does actually happen from that perspective when you do come in, because it is so energizing. Also, if you think about theaters in general, whether they're, you know, theaters where there's music, you know, be it rock concerts or dance, etc. Or Broadway theaters. It's often like it continues to be a wonderful experience from my perspective, and to make sure you have this history. So I just would like to, and it's kind of a little bit of a question, but it's also a thought. I think it's important not only to capture this, but to use it in a way that's both energizing and nostalgic. And then also, because it's 2024, not only to capture what's here, but if you think about the Apollo Theater over the many, many, many years that it's been around, it has reinvented itself so many times. And there's so much history in addition to these images, you know, whether it's, you know, Bob Marley or, you know, James Brown or Jeffrey Holder, or I almost feel like I do feel that it's important to get this, but to include that and to bring them in a way that is contributes to the excitement and also provides information that's important historically.
If I may,
Mm-hmm.
wish I was a little taller.
You
The
could move
excitement
it
at the
down.
Apollo
Mhm.
and part of our attempt here was to
Mhm.
capture the experience that everyone is having, and it is individual. And our experience begins lining up on 125th Street. The minute you get under our marquee and those lights are going and all those legends are down, you know, we just Babyface just last week was, you know, put into the Walk of Fame. That excitement begins out there. Our security is done outdoors. We have, you know, typical Broadway style security. And the excitement that happens in the lobby is instantaneous. And the truth of the matter is the march to the theaters is very slow, even in exciting times, because what people want to do is just walk real slow and get excited about, we're not Broadway. We don't do 8 shows a week over and over. We do 150 to 200 events a year. Every one of them, the audience coming is wanting desperately to see that person. We have Smokey Robinson coming in a few weeks. Clearly, those people will be excited from the minute they get off on a taxi on Frederick Douglass. I think what the designers have done, and I appreciated your comment about the staircase, I did. I think I understand where that is about letting everybody have that experience. And right now, it's our ability to serve the public. We're also a not-for-profit, and we're attempting very much to bring in the community. And that lobby doesn't really allow, it's very small. So part of what we were attempting to do is to say, let's expand the experience. Let's make it one of the video screens that we have is to create our archive. We've been digitalizing our archive for years. And here you can walk into the lobby, and it isn't just about advertising. We have plenty of screens. Is that you will be able to go on that screen and actually you're looking at these great photos. Now you can go in and actually see some of the archival from the lobby for free. So the idea here is to create a place where people can hang out during the day and absorb it without taking away the excitement at showtime. I mean, if you come, I'm there a lot of the times, there are 1,600 people lined up, all wrapped around the street, and they're coming in, and they're just, rarely do our shows begin on time. That's part of the excitement of music and dance. People will come in and they're celebrating the time that they're at the Apollo. And so I think we're trying to do the best we can to keep both the legacy and also allow us to kind of look forward. We're the place where new artists can come and do what they haven't been able to do anywhere else, which is at the Apollo. So thank you for your consideration.
Great, thank you. That was very helpful.
I think one thing that, in terms of energy, one thing that the current design of the lobby does pretty well, actually, is this wall of mirrors that are almost floor-to-ceiling mirrors that take you right from the street all the way to the theater doors. The intention of bringing the mirror wall back in a historic context in a framed mirror that's on the wall in each of these bays between the pilasters was to try to mimic that excitement of seeing all the way down the lobby from the moment you come in. And then, as Casanaldo mentioned, but I'll put a little more detail to, behind one of those mirror displays, panels, is a video display that will be interactive for patrons when they come into the lobby during the day. They'll be able to actually go into and explore the Apollo's digital archives, call up videos of historic performances, but also the Apollo can recreate the montages of historic performers with contemporary performers going forward, and they can display that on the video panel that's just opposite the historic displays. And so we're trying to think about this organization not only as a historic entity, but as a contemporary and future performing arts organization going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, any other final questions? Sorry. Thank you. Commissioner Chapin.
Yes, this is a question really for you, Sarah, or the general counsel about the applicant's earlier remarks about sort of dealing with the federal standards with CHIPO and trying to not having enough documentation to produce some of the detailing that we might find more appropriate for the plaster work, or I don't know, maybe even the lighting. And I just wondered about, your experience in landmark staff dealing with, helping to deal with that particular kind of situation, because I'm sure we have encountered that in the past. So I was just interested in your general thoughts about that.
I can give some broad thoughts. I don't know then Corey or Mark, but you know, it is true when you are going through the review at the state level on National Register property, there are a set of standards called the Secretary of Interior standards, and they are much more prescriptive in terms of what can be done and what can't be done than what we do, which is we have to find something to be appropriate. And so I think in some ways the appropriateness is more broad, and it allows us to find many different approaches to be appropriate. And so we have often asked for replication of details, or actually I don't even want to say we've asked for it. We have accepted proposals that have been for recreations. We've accepted proposals that have been for an abstraction of the historic detailing or style. And we have accepted proposals that are very contemporary that also kind of speak to the historic style, scale, materials, and details, but in a very abstract way. And so, you know, depending on the set of circumstances, what's there existing, what was there historically, and the site conditions of the particular property, we have been able to find a broad range of approaches to be appropriate. And so, you know, while the standards are very specific, we generally are able to find a way where there is not a conflict and the end goal can be achieved for both agencies. And so in this case, you know, right now they are restoring components. They are restoring the bay structure and returning pilasters and frames for the mirrors, which currently don't exist. But they're also introducing some abstract elements that, you know, sort of think about the historic character, but I think also think about the Apollo moving forward into the contemporary and into the future. And they have taken those ideas and abstracted them to work with their reestablished historic components, if that helps. So I think in short, our standard of appropriateness has generally been broad enough to allow multiple approaches. Corey, I sort of rambled there. I don't know if you want to add anything. Okay. So ultimately, we don't find ourselves in a situation where we have too great of a conflict that can't be resolved.
Yeah, and I obviously have seen it, you know, several places where we have, you know, had considerable flexibility, let us say, on many issues that we're confronted with historic restoration, let's call it for the sake of, well, in this case it is in many respects. I was kind of most interested in the applicant feeling that they were restricted in doing certain kinds of detailing because they didn't have the evidence that other than photographic that existed. And so that was,
yeah,
you know,
and it is true. They may not be able to recreate historic detail that is missing. And I would say that just remember the commission approved a renovation in 2006 that did not require replicating historic detailing. So we didn't
Sure.
require it in the past.
And I know that we don't, you know, we often do not require historic detailing depending on the situation. Okay, thank you, Sarah. It's just that that's a little bit of a thorny issue.
Yes, no, it's helpful to understand how the two different reviews intersect. So thank you for asking the question. All right, any other questions? Okay, let's move to our discussion. Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Ginsburg, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is closed and we're going to begin our discussion. So we know on the exterior, we have a proposal to replace the neon technology, the neon tubes with LED tubes to upgrade the technology to increase performance, longevity and address energy efficiency. And then on the interior, we are looking at a proposal for new finishes and fixtures in the lobby and in the auditorium, most of which do not, at least in the lobby, affect historic fabric and actually return some historic rhythm or components to the building, but with abstracted details. And then I think, the floor is probably the most dramatic change, and also introducing the video technology to allow those sort of a 21st century version of those murals, and allow an appreciation of all of the art that this theater houses. And then on the interior, we're looking at the fixtures as well, the additional seating and the fabric panels and the acoustic panels, and also the chandeliers in there. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Chu, would you like to start this one?
Sure. So I think we've had a lot of discussion about this already. I do want to say that, again, I think this is a great project. Every theater that can be helped right now and is a civic destination and a magnet for communities is a positive thing. So accessibility, welcoming, and I see that happening in your projects. I think that's great. Also, as you said, since 1934, it is the largest performing arts institution committed to Black culture and creativity. So I think those are the things that I'm thinking about. And any comments I have will be overlaid on how to best celebrate that aspect, which I think is the reason we've landmarked this building. It's its cultural significance. It doesn't have a lot of architectural fabric remaining that is highly ornate or anything. So we're not, the comments of replication, I'm not proposing to replicate anything here. I think these comments are really more about the feel and the energy of what was working well in the historic condition of the building. So the comments that I have are the ones I have stated. I do feel that the lobby sequence can use some finessing. And again, to go park it back to the historic images for the sort of feeling, I think Jeannie's comments about the images are a huge component here. And that's really putting content, whether it be digital or printed, in these bays that are already naturally created by the pillars marching down. I do think that it could use a little bit of finessing, massaging in terms of its shaping, ceiling, soffit lighting, as Commissioner Chen noted, I think should be looked at again. I do feel that the hoops are a bit generic, and this is a special place. I think it could use a little more sparkle at a finer scale. My comment about the floor, I do like potentially this accent of the gold in the floor. I think that it needs a sparkle. The theater has that. It's great. I think that maybe the scale of the pattern should be just looked at. It seems overscaled, and I lose my human scale within it. It's actually a tall volume, but somehow it doesn't feel that way here. A person is actually, like, not that high, and is halfway up that space. There's something, I think, a little bit of detail will help enhance that level of scale, and that it's about the scale. In terms of the doors, I do think that the doors could be also relooked at. I appreciate this trying to get a more contemporary energy, but I'm not so sure it's the most appropriate effect for really leading me into the Great Hall. In the interior, I completely appreciate the challenges of variable acoustics. I know all the stuff that happens in there. Most of the stuff is amplified in these houses, and there's a lot of speakers. There's light booms. There's all kinds of stuff everywhere. I totally understand that. My comment is that I think that even with an application of acoustic panel on the wall, if I were just to look at it as a designer, as an elevation, I think even the panel widths, heights could be more, less abrupt onto the wall. You have a natural diagonal rake. There's a natural there's natural lines in there that could just be followed. I don't think I would ever feel like you were replicating anything. It's just really, they're just sitting better with what's there. That's my comment. I don't think you need to revolutionize the approach. The light fixtures in the house, I do think need to be studied a little bit. They're new introductions. Not so sure the chandeliers on the wall are the most appropriate style in the house, or the sconces that were placed there. I think the improvements to the house are good. I didn't notice ADA spots, but I'm assuming that they're providing additional accessibility spots, which is a great thing. It makes sense. The seating layouts that I saw, I would say then we didn't see designs of the mixing position behind the seats that would be put where the bar is, but that's again something I would want you to work with staff on the aesthetics of that. What's there now is abrupt as well, and I'm sure you guys are going to prove that. The exterior. So I would like to hear my fellow commissioners about this. This is a debate between neon and LED. Gotta say, I love neon just because there's not so little of it around. I totally recognize unsustainable. They're high maintenance. They're pain for owners to maintain. And so I appreciate it. And to that extent, I would be open to the change. That said, I do love what neon says about the history of what it was. It's just an immediate impact that I sense. So I would be open to that, but I'd love to hear what the rest of my commissioners say.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lutfi.
That was a really very good summary, and you covered a lot of the things that I brought up. So I might not repeat them because I think I spent time on it and everyone gets it. I'm just going to go to the outside to start. I am very sympathetic about this potential for lights being off. And it's just such a negative visual image and message that it sends. And for this particular venue, especially, that's had so many ups and downs over, I think it's kind of important for it to shine brightly on so many levels. So even though I completely agree with what Commissioner Chu was saying about neon, I think I can accept this switch. And also from a sustainability standpoint, I mean, it's definitely, we're going there. So there's no reason not to get on the bandwagon, because if you don't, we have to change anyway. So that works for me. And then I also, I don't, just in terms of the floors to start, I think it would be great if you could just take a look at, sort of it might be too energized in terms of the contrast and the number of the diagonals. And if you could spend just a little time on the coloration, or just like, because I don't think you want it to overwhelm, because it's not that you want people to get distracted by the floor when they come in. You want them to take in everything that's within their vision, at eye level and beyond. So I would just, that's like a tweaking thing that I would recommend. And I think your comments about the stairwell, Stephen, are very good. And then I also think the coloration on the inside where the bar area is could be, if you could work with staff on that a little bit, because it seems we have a lot of red in this building,
That's outside of the designated space.
Oh, it is.
So, but we are looking at the opening.
Okay, okay. So forget what I said, although I do want to say there's a lot of red in this space. There's a lot of red in this space, so wherever it ends up, I think there should be some. So the opening, I actually think it needs to be a little higher. That you need to raise the arch a little bit, but that's just my opinion. It seems a little, for such a grand space, it seems a little, the ceiling height seems a little low as, through the archway. I think the work on the inside of the theater is fantastic. I'm going to leave the comments to the experts about, the acoustical panels. It's not my area of expertise, but I appreciate everything that's being raised. I kind of like the chandeliers. It's, they're decorative. I don't think they're overdone, but they are a touch of, modernity, but I think they also speak to the past.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chen?
Yeah, I agree with many of the comments, especially Commissioner Chu's comment about, let's start with the positive. I believe the new replacement for neon on the outside can be done very successfully, both sustainably and could be easily maintained, much easier than, there's a reason Chinatown is well known for their neon signs, and they are no longer there. Majority are no longer there. And I wish the Chinese theater, it could be like Apollo, still there. So this is talk about nostalgia. So I'm of the opinion that at least personally, that the replacement on the outside for the iconic, world-renowned Apollo sign will be further enhanced in this thing. Having spent some time in one summer, hot summer like this, going to Boston to learn about theater acoustics with the then expert, Bo Baranek and Newman. One thing about the interior is because I was fascinated by the challenges of why Avery Fisher Hall has to be redone so many times. I just couldn't believe that they cannot get it right. So the one big takeaway from the Bo Baranek, he invited us to barbecue afterwards, was about this generally not enough fuzz, meaning the fabric to absorb, to dampen the sound. And so I see the challenges here, which is that you need to really increase, the early days you will hang drapery down, and as long as you don't block the vista, even that will help. So in this case, you have really thick material, which is not great for dampening. So I am fine with that one. I think the devil is in the details, how you structure. The danger inside here, to me, is what Commissioner Chu and Commissioner Lufty alluded to, is that there's a sense of nostalgia for this place. It's a really, really world-renowned, iconic, reflecting the contribution of the African American and in the theater performing arts. The danger here exists is that you have quite a bit of new modern insertions that could be a distraction, whether it's the bow floor pattern or the thing. So to that degree, that whatever, there's no right way to do light fixtures or wrong fixture. So the question is, how do you deploy it, in what shape and what form? The images, the experience, I think that the here is, as this gentleman correctly said, it's about the experience. It really is about a communal experience. And that experience requires a procession, a process, right? Waiting outside, getting off the cab, getting off the mass transit, or however you get there. And the anticipation of walking in and that whole experience. I think I'm glad to hear that you digitize all the images. The thing that's on the inside is obviously, I hope you can greatly enhance it much more than just one LCD panel that says we used to have this or things like that, as Commissioner Chu said correctly. So I highly encourage you to experiment more and do more of that reflection of the homage to what was there, why it was so exciting in the 1920s, 1930s to go there, to go up to Harlem, not just to Apollo, to the jazz clubs, to all the underground basement places. So, but overall, I look forward to seeing a very good project, but it's in your hands.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Ginsburg.
So I want to echo my fellow commissioners. You guys have really thought this through. It's really great you're doing this. And then we're each picking on some specific things and so on. I think the LED neon replacement is fine, and there are a lot of reasons to do it. And it is sad to see the neon disappearing, but there are good reasons why it's disappearing. One of my comments on the interior as I look at this is all these renderings have no people in them. And you'd never see it that way, which makes it very, in certain ways, hard to perceive it as, I think Stephen talked about the scale. Having a few people in the renderings would have been good. And with that said, the black floor, and I realize the concept of setting off with the brass, but the original floor was lighter. And it may be, one thing, Stephen was talking about the scale. The other thing is, if it were not a black floor, but a lighter floor, it would be less aggressive. And then the other thing, in general, I think the lighting is fine, but it almost feels overlit, that there are too many different light sources and there's not enough play of shade and shadow. And but in general, I think this is a really good project. I think the acoustic panels sound like they're necessary. You can play with the proportions, and I can support this and the things I'm talking about. And I think the things the other commissioners are talking about are relatively small tweaks that, at least for me, could be worked with staff. But
All right, Commissioner Goldblum.
Okay, thanks. All right, LED switch on the outside is acceptable. I think it's a classic case of a substitute material. The dimension is virtually, it's a 1/16 of an inch difference. I don't think that's substantive at that distance. And the photos of the mock-up for me back that up. The theater, I actually am not deeply upset by the acoustical panels, even though they are rather visible, primarily because they're going in an area of smooth wall, which was undecorated before, and they're covered with a fabric that is the same fabric as that's going elsewhere, and they seem to follow the module. They should follow the module of the fabric below. I also thought that the comment in the testimony was interesting, that the staff might want to look at the fabric for the theater as not being a flat fabric, but something that has some more dimensionality to it, like something that's probably, do a little research, see if you can figure out what that was. Our trip to the Frick, not that it's the same in any way, was really emphasized for me the importance of the texture of the fabric. So I think the RCP has grills that are way too big and very disruptive of what is a very decorative surface that everyone sees in this theater. So I think the applicants should work on reducing the size of those monster, you could crawl into those circular registers. They're too big, and they become a decorative feature of the ceiling. I think that nowadays we have lots of really good ways to distribute AC that don't involve man-size holes. I think we should try to look at that. I think that the lighting, I'm totally okay with a modern lighting, and I actually think that the sconces look all right. For me, the main chandelier looked, I don't know, Stephen used the word generic. For me, it has a kind of a suburban hotel feel to me. I think it needs to be more specific. And I think that that leads to a general concern about the modern insertions, which focuses on the lobby. The problem with the lobby for me, and I agree with what others have said, but I see it through this lens. It's kind of coming out of left field. It seeks to kind of replicate the rhythm of the original, but with purposefully different design elements in order to, I guess, assuage the federal standards. The result is kind of generic and left. It doesn't come from anywhere. If you're going to do an abstracted version of a classical space, then you wouldn't have that zooty floor. If you're going to do a modern version or a jazz age version of something, then you wouldn't have these kind of pilasters that, they don't look abstracted. They just look undercooked. I think it's important to note that the ceiling, as Stephen noted as well, the uplighting plus the rings, what it does is it suppresses the virtual height of the space, even though the height of the space is actually 12 feet to the highest element of the coffer, because the lights go up into that, and the circle, which is so big, comes down below it to what looks like 8 feet or so, 9 feet off the floor. You really are feeling suppressed. And one of the things that's most striking about the lobby, as in its original vision, as the photos show, was that you felt all 12 feet of it. Here, by the time you're done with the beams and the circles, you're really pushing yourself down significantly. So I think that as a way to kind of shade what others have spoken about in terms of specifics, my general thought is make the lobby work with the building. You have an enormous well of detail in the theater itself. You have an enormous well of detail on the outside with the canopy, the marquee. These are iconic images. To come out of, to bring to it something that is completely alien and not having a sustaining character in and of itself, because it's seeking to kind of emulate but not really emulate. It's like you've pulled your punches, and there's not enough internal integrity to the lobby to make it work. I think that whatever you do in the lobby, it should be carried forth into the vestibule. The vestibule is the first place we see. It has to be consistent and has to be a consistent experience from the front door to the back door. Whether that's the wainscoting or the mirror treatment or whatever it is, it's got to be one thing. No problem with the digital. No, I agree with Stephen on the doors. One of the things that you see about the doors when you look at the original photo is the doors were a single surface target. When you enter this longitudinal space, you saw at the back of it a thing made of a different material. And that thing went from the floor to the ceiling. The fact that your doors kind of stop at a certain seemingly, out of left field height, there was no, why didn't it go the whole way? Why didn't it stop at a line that was articulated in the architecture somewhere else? I think it just made it, and then it's surrounded by a kind of gray generic wall material. I think it feels like an underwhelming target. In terms, and there's also one thing that really, really bugged me, which is if you go to the view where you're looking kind of from the theater doors back towards the front door, you see that there's like a dropped ceiling over the archway into the elevator. And it's just like a dropped soffit. It's like, oh, I don't know what we're going to do there, so we'll throw a hi-hat in it. But it seemed like for what should be for what is a designated space, and therefore it should be thoughtful and consistent. I understand that's probably related to the stair above. There should be a better way to integrate that lower ceiling into an overall design that looks intentional and celebrates the historic importance of the space. I'll stop there. Wait, let me just check the acoustical panels. Yes. Right. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, Commissioner Chapin.
Yeah, I think that it's great to see this historic theater restored, as others have said, and I want to make that clear as well. I think with the, for the exterior that I also prefer the neon, but I understand the reasons for using the LED and I can approve that. And with regard to the seating and the other functional interior changes that are being made, I think those are all fine. On the acoustic panels, I agree with others who've said in general, and just think that the staff should, work with them on a careful installation. I think that digitizing the images on the wall is appropriate, and it would be good to use them to lead people in, as others have suggested, probably just really expanding that. I found that I probably my main concerns are just about the lobby in general and the entranceway, as others have stated as well. And I think that I agree with one of the testimony which expressed a need to really reflect the richness and elegance of this space, and that I think, and from my perspective, that would mean more attention to some of the details in the lobby space. So it was interesting what Michael was just saying about the total approach, and that it's kind of hung up between the modern and the historic. For me, I think it would be to try to find something a little more historic in terms of lighting, the chandeliers, and also of historic character, not replicating. I should make that clear. And that would also be true with the detailing. And the same time, if they presented something totally modern, I obviously we would review that as we have in the past. But I think that in this case, because of the nature and history of this space, I think that moving in a more historic direction for both the details and the lighting would be the way I would think would be more successful. And the other thing that gives me some concern is that opening, as some commented already, that opening into the bar area, the way it's done right now, it seems rather distracting as you're going in and you're progressing, that it kind of interrupts the progression. It may partly be the colors that are being used, but there might be other ways to make it less of a distraction. And one commenter in public testimony suggested an additional pillar. I didn't want to get into that kind of detail as what should be done, but I feel that space is kind of really pulling your attention away from the main entrance. And obviously you want people to be aware it's there, which is fine. But I think it just needs to be more recessive in the situation so that you're more focused on the grand entrance and lobby and vestibule and moving forward into the theater. And in general, I think it's a terrific project, and I'm very positive about it. Those are my comments.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for your comments, and thank you all for your thoughtful presentation. And I do want to say that what I've heard around this table is a lot of support for the Apollo, for its incredible cultural significance and its need to continue to express that and adapt and be contemporary as well. And so I think understanding the sort of tension between the standards and our review, but also the fact that the sort of this tension between whether you're sort of returning it or doing something modern. I think all of those can be worked out. And I know there was one comment that felt pretty strongly about that it's sort of neither. But I think most people feel that you can do a little bit of both here and that you don't need to stray that far from the scheme that you've been working on with the state. But I think that there are certain areas, particularly in the lobby, that could be restudied, that could really speak a little bit more directly to the historic character of the Apollo while still sort of aiming for your, future look as well, and would stay within the approach that you've taken with the state. So, and in particular, I think that's really focused around the floors and the ceiling and that sense of space as you come through it. And so there have been a lot of suggestions. I'm not going to recap them all, but I'll let you all observe them. The staff can work with you on them. I think that we have unanimous support for the LED signs on the outside, and I think for the acoustic panels as well, although there were some comments about studying the texture and quality of the fabric, and that may be something to think about some more. I think the proportions do fit within the module, and I think that's what people support. So one could look at the fabric texture a little bit more, and we'll have you back as soon as you're ready. And maybe when you do come back, actually having some people in the renderings would help to give a sense. And maybe a rendering that's sort of further back from right where you walk in and sort of how you. So I think that a lot of this can be done sort of as refinements to your approach. And we will get to a point together where this can hopefully satisfy the state, but also more importantly, we can find appropriate and really celebrate the history of the Apollo. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. It's 1 o'clock. We are behind schedule. So let's break for lunch now. We'll come back at 1:30 and continue with our starting with public